1,000 years ago, the first settlers left Earth and formed the League of Free Worlds. Some got warm, sun-drenched planets, while others were fated to be born on a planet covered with impenetrable swamps. People built a model city there where order, prosperity, and total control reigned. Christie was among those who couldn't reconcile with such an existence, which landed her in prison. But since there is no death penalty on planet XT-59, a group of 10 prisoners is sentenced to lifelong exile in the swamps. If lucky, they might reach the Paradise Islands, but no one recalls such instances since the swamps are teeming with dangerous creatures. This time, as the prisoners were prepared for their last journey, the captain incapacitates one of the prisoners, his head shrouded in a sack, and orders him to move forward. The prisoner inquires about the security barrier and begins to move very cautiously. He miraculously avoids the hit from the security's invisible barrier, and the captain orders to deactivate the protection. Then, the captain reads the sentence and removes the sack from the prisoner's head, followed by an order to give the prisoners a metal box with supplies. They have an hour to set off, or the guards will kill them on the spot. One of the women goes into hysteria, claiming she's a tourist and innocent. She tries to run, but Christie catches and calms the unfortunate woman. The prisoner, freed from the sack, suggests that people introduce themselves. He is Irwin, but the initiative is intercepted by the formidable-looking Youst, nicknamed the Polar Wolf, who knows these swamps well as it's not his first exile. The wolf wants to know everything about each member of the team, but their acquaintance is interrupted by the appearance of a dangerous local creature living underground, called the Pagan. The creature senses vibration and moves towards it, dragging its prey underground. Christie declares that she intends to only listen to Irwin. Youst reminds her of his superiority, to which Irwin proposes to divide the supplies and opens the box. He manages to grab only a knife when the others pounce on the box with supplies. The wolf again reminds everyone that he's the boss, but Irwin refuses to listen to a prisoner and announces his departure to the Paradise Islands. Christie joins him, but first, they want their share of the supplies. The wolf's henchman tries to claim rights over Christie. Then Irwin puts a knife to his throat, reminding that any attempt of the prisoners to destroy each other will result in them being immediately shot on the spot. So, the wolf has no choice but to give the pair their share of supplies. Additionally, Irwin requests the metal box itself in exchange for a portion of food, and the wolf agrees to give it away. The wolf orders his group to prepare for the journey when Christie asks Irwin to help the helpless tourist. But he refuses. That woman is already dead, even though she doesn't know it. Irwin explains to Christie that she should go first because she is lighter than him, and he will be able to pull her out if she falls into the swamp. At that time, a voice from the fortress commands the prisoners to lave the shore. The wolf leads his team forward. Irwin and Christie tie a heavy box with ropes and also set off. Suddenly, a shot is fired from the fortress. People hide behind the rocks, and Irwin realizes that he was the intended target. He forces Christie to crawl out of the dangerous square. Along the way, the girl notices small, crawling creatures, but Irwin assures her of their harmlessness, suggesting they could be their food, which disgusts Christie. Soon, the pair reach a relatively safe place and confirm that Wolf's team is following their trail. Watching how Irwin calculates everything in advance and can find a solution to any problem, Christie worries, trying to understand who the man was before his exile. The girl doubts the existence of Paradise Islands, to which Irwin rightly remarks that then they wouldn't have tried to kill him. After all, the guards would have been sure that he would definitely die. And although it's his first time in the swamp, he is confident that he can find the right way. Meanwhile, the captain is reprimanded by the president for the advisor still being alive. Sergeant Matthias, who was the disguised prisoner, failed to eliminate the advisor. The captain reassures the president, stating the swamps are impassable. Meanwhile, Christie and Irwin find a small stream of clean water, and the girl washes her face, pondering her misfortune. Suddenly, Irwin asks Christie to freeze, but she thinks he's decided to take advantage of her. However, it turns out Irwin spotted the Pagan, which suddenly emerged from under the ground. Christie grabs a knife and cuts off part of the creature. After that, Christie treats Irwin's wound while sharing that she ended up in prison for standing up to an inspector who tried to force her into intimacy. At that moment, the wolf's group appears from behind the rocks. The man intends to take back the metal box, but Irwin takes the part of the creature cut off by Christie and uses it as an electric whip. The wolf realizes the situation is bad and decides to let them go. The pair leaves, but the wolf stubbornly follows their tracks. Erwin heard that on the rotten shore there's a place where former prisoners live, and the wolf is their leader. He follows them, hoping that the pair will first fall into a swamp trap. Erwin notices the tips of the pagan sticking out of the ground and orders Christie to lie down, be silent, and not move. They do so, watching as a gigantic root of the pagan appears over the wolf's group, dragging several people underground. Meanwhile, the president again contacts the captain, who assures that he has taken the necessary measures and his man is on the trail. In the swamps, Erwin and Christie stop for the night. The man is ready to talk about himself if the girl solves his riddle about the cost of a chocolate bar. But while he states the conditions of the riddle, Christie falls asleep. The girl wakes up to a strange sound and sees a wave of creatures approaching them. She tries to run, but Erwin throws her into the box, climbs in himself, and closes the lid. The pair waits out the invasion, and although the box's lid is eventually breached, the people remain unharmed. Finally, silence falls, and they emerge outside. Christie's first question is about the answer to the riddle, and knowing it, she calms down. Now the box is no longer needed, and the pair throws it away. Soon they reach the liquid part of the swamp. Meanwhile, the remaining part of the wolf's group follows their trail, but Layla, realizing they might lose the couple, runs after Erwin and Christie. The wolf rushes after her and falls into a swamp pit. Here Layla slips up, saying that Erwin is a former presidential advisor and knows best how to act. Nevertheless, one of the prisoners, Jan, helps the wolf out. In the evening, Erwin sets up camp, forces Christie to eat raw tadpoles, and confesses that he was the president's advisor, but his conscience tormented him. He collected a lot of different information and wanted to tell the public about it. The authorities realized they couldn't get rid of him quietly and sent him to the swamps. But he managed to launch a virus into the control system, which can only be turned off knowing the code, and only he has the code. So, after the system's collapse, free people will be able to build their new free city management system. Christie reminds him that then they will definitely be looking for him, but the man is confident that by that time, they will already be on the islands. Meanwhile, in the city, the system begins to collapse. The communications satellites fail first. In the morning, Layla and those who left the wolf encounter wild people on their way. Hearing their screams, Christie curses whoever invented this method of punishment. Erwin admits that he did it because he thought it was humane. Christie breaks down and berates Erwin, urging him to burn himself so no one can learn his code. He starts screaming, calling the savages to fight to die, but no one comes out. Then Christie confesses that she was offered freedom for his death. Meanwhile, the wolf finds those hiding among the rocks of his group. To save herself, Layla tells about the offer she received to kill the advisor, after which a ship will fly for her. The wolf orders to find the sensor on her body. The girl runs away and dies in the web of a dangerous swamp fungus. Seeing that their spy is dead, the captain arms Sergeant Matthias and sends him on the advisor's trail. Meanwhile, another man from the wolf's group dies, and then Jan catches up with the couple, and distracted by him, Erwin falls into a trap to the wolf, who intends to exchange the advisor for freedom. Erwin, tied up, tries to persuade Christie to run, but she suddenly kisses him. The wolf forces Erwin to stand, but he mocks the prisoner, and the wolf has to carry Erwin on his back. Meanwhile, Sergeant Matthias's group lands in the ruins of the old prison where wild criminals live. Soon the wolf's group also gets there. Leaving the tied advisor and Christie aside, the wolf goes to negotiate with the sergeant. But while they are agreeing, Erwin frees himself and escapes. The wolf promises to find him but gets shot by the sergeant, after which Matthias finds Christie and Jan, and killing the latter leads the girl forward. Erwin confronts Matthias and demands to release Christie in exchange for himself. The military agrees but shoots a tranquilizer, hitting Christie, and himself receives a knife in the back from the fatally wounded wolf. Erwin thanks the dying man, who advises not to go to the Paradise Islands because they don't exist. Then he drinks poison to avoid suffering. Later, Erwin, carrying Christie in his arms, reaches the sea, and the advisor realizes that the Paradise Islands are rafts made of plants, and they can cross the strait on them. Meanwhile, the captain loses contact with Matthias and realizes that further search for the advisor is useless, but he sends the last combat drone after him. At this time, Christie comes to her senses and realizes that their island is gradually sinking. The prisoner with them, Job, hears this and goes into the water to save the couple. Soon they hear the sound of an approaching drone, but the drone fails to reach them and falls into the water, thereby proving that Erwin's virus worked and the city's control system is destroyed. Their joy is overshadowed by a cliff appearing ahead. The couple wraps themselves in their plant-made island and miraculously survives a gigantic waterfall. Soon, they reach the shore, where a secret bunker is set up in case of the president's escape, designed and built by Erwin. But he doesn't know the entire code. The last figure was entered by the president. There are only 2 attempts, so guessing it is impossible. Then Christy remembers the riddle about the chocolate bar and, knowing the president's answer to it, which Erwin also posed to him, suggests entering the number he named. And the bunker opens. But then it turns out that the hidden spaceship there is single-seated. Erwin insists that Christy should fly alone, but she refuses because she loves him. In the last scenes of the movie, the voices of Christy and Erwin are heard, making it clear that they somehow managed to squeeze into the spaceship together. Thanks to their rescue, the League of Free Worlds learned the truth about the planet and destroyed the remnants of the total control system. But 10 years later, a new system was established on planet XT-59, much more cruel than the previous one. The movie is simple and at times imperfect, but it's truthful and unexpectedly relevant because no one can bring freedom to the people from the outside. Everything is achieved only through one's own efforts and by taking responsibility for oneself and no one else. The 1950s. Alice and Jack live in a typical American town. They hang out with friends, have fun, drive around, and love each other. One day, while Alice is getting ready for a party with friends, Jack goes to work with a crowd of other white collars. A female voice narrates that today is the 997th day. All employees are on their way to headquarters. All residents are safe and accounted for. Ladies are wished a good day, and Alice starts her household chores. Then she goes to her dance classes, like all the exemplary wives in town. The instructor, Shelley, reminds them, beauty is in control and grace is in symmetry. After the class, Alice returns home, chats with her neighbor Bonnie, who constantly scolds her children, and goes to take down the dried laundry. A catchy tune constantly plays in Alice's head, and she hums it. Suddenly, she notices another neighbor, Margaret, standing in front of her house, oblivious to her surroundings. Alice starts cooking, but one egg arouses her suspicion. She squeezes it in her hand and the egg turns out to be empty. She crushes the rest, they're all hollow. This activity is interrupted by burnt meat. In the evening, she greets her husband, beautifully dressed, with her hair done, and at a set table. However, her husband decides to start with another, more pleasant activity. The next day, the women relax by the pool. Alice is distracted, the song in her head again causing her concern. Then a visual sequence appears, a circle of women in wigs. Later, Alice approaches a model of the town and mindlessly traces her finger along the streets. And when she leaves the town limits, Bonnie picks her up. It's time for cocktails served by her children. During this time, the men discuss distracting topics. Everything is decent, sunny, and calm. A signal sounds, and Shelley welcomes the new residents. She is happy that the couple can learn from her husband, Frank, who has created something extraordinary, a new world. Margaret interrupts Shelley's speech, saying she and her husband shouldn't be here. Alice's husband hastily leads her away, and the newly appeared Frank apologizes to the guests. The couple is going through a tough time. They're tasked to chase dreams and confront chaos, the main enemy of progress. And they all change the world. The guests echo Frank's words. Everyone here is happy, they are all one family. The man thanks the women for supporting their husbands, they are their support. The fun continues. Alice goes to find Jack, but finds Margaret, who says she has nightmares she can't be here, but Alice's husband quickly pulls the curtain in front of Alice. Alice finds her husband in the house. Jack kisses her, and the couple gets some alone time. But at the brightest moment, Alice sees Frank, who, smiling, watches their lovemaking. Later, the women gather in a shopping center and discuss their perfect lives, and poor Margaret. Alice feels sorry for her neighbor, though Bonnie thinks she brought the trouble on herself. After all, she took her son into the desert by herself. They found her, but without the child. The conversation turns to what the men are doing. No one knows for sure, but it's said that they are making weapons. Bonnie cuts in. That's not their business. Women also do work. They create comfort. At night, Alice has a nightmare, but in the morning, as usual, she sees her husband off to work and starts her household chores. Then she goes on a trip. She is the only one left on the trolley bus and says she just wants to ride. Suddenly, she sees a plane flying towards the mountains, and then it crashes. Alice yells to the driver, but he doesn't understand what she wants. She urges him to help the victims, but he is on his route and cannot deviate. Alice jumps out of the trolleybus and runs towards the mountains. She walks a long way through the desert, then reaches a road and climbs a high mountain, topped by a strange dome. She approaches closer and stops at a mirrored glass. Around her, no one, only her reflection. Alice raises her hands to the glass and loses consciousness. In front of her in the darkness, a circle of dancing women and a male voice calls for order. People must allow themselves to discover what life should be like. The next moment, Alice finds herself on her bed. Coming to the kitchen, she sees Jack preparing dinner. The dishes are in disarray, many groceries spoiled. Alice doesn't understand what's happening, and her husband explains that when he came from work, she was already asleep, and she returned home on the trolley bus. Alice doesn't understand. Did the driver come back for her? But now Jack looks at his wife uncomprehendingly. Alice decides she saw everything in a dream. The next morning, everything goes as usual. Alice sends her husband off and starts cleaning the window glass, but suddenly it seems to move. It presses her against the wall, and the woman is gasping for air. The next moment, the phone rings and Alice is completely free. Margaret's voice on the phone urges her to get out of there. After all, she was there and saw it all herself. Alice again sees dancing women, but now it is herself and her friends. And suddenly, instead of her own reflection, Margaret appears, approaching the mirror from the other side and starts banging her head against the surface. Alice screams and comes to. She runs home and sees Margaret on the roof of her house. Turning to Alice, the woman cuts her own throat and falls down. Alice screams in horror, and the arriving employees pick her up and carry away the neighbor's body. In the evening, she tries to explain to Jack, but he doesn't believe his wife. Margaret is in the hospital. She accidentally cut herself while washing windows. Alice feels guilty because her neighbor asked for help. What is happening around them? She asks him to tell her what he is doing on the project, but he cannot talk about it. He asks her to stop the hysterics, which could ruin everything. At night, Alice watches an advertisement for their town and catches herself thinking that it feels like she is floundering in a pool from which it is impossible to swim out. In the morning, she is cooking and suddenly starts wrapping her head with cling film. Alice seems to want to bring herself to her senses, but even the suffocation doesn't help, and she tears off the film. The arriving doctor assures the woman that it's just nervous strain, as Alice witnessed Margaret falling. The woman again insists that her neighbor slit her own throat. The doctor suggests prescribing her pills, but Jack refuses. They will cope. The doctor assures Margaret will soon recover and return home. He leaves, forgetting his briefcase, from which Alice manages to pull out a folder with Margaret's personal file. But all the text is smeared, unreadable. Alice burns the folder. She drinks alcohol and again sees dancing women. Then she finds herself in the bathroom. Jack is unhappy. They will be late, and he brings her a dress. Then he asks Alice to think about having a child, and tonight they have a wonderful evening ahead. The couple arrives at a restaurant where all the town's residents have already gathered. A performance by a glamorous blonde is demonstrated to the audience, and Alice again sees the circle of women and Margaret killing herself. Alice feels ill, but those around her do not notice. Frank gives a speech and invites Jack on stage. He is ready to congratulate the man as he is now entering the senior expert council. He presents Jack with a token of loyalty, a ring. The audience applauds, and Jack performs a dance of gratitude. Alice, unable to watch this, runs to the bathroom. She has a vision of another Jack who has lost his job. A perplexed Bonnie finds her. Alice tries to explain something, but her friend interrupts her. Was Alice at the headquarters? Has she gone mad? She's acting like a spoiled child. Her job is to support her husband, yet she is ruining his career. And now she is behaving like Margaret. Returning to the hall, Alice watches Jack's triumph and restrains herself. In the morning, Jack reminds her that they will have guests in the evening. She needs to express gratitude to Frank. Alice greets the guests with a smile on her face. Everything, as always, is perfect. Her husband meets Frank while Alice finishes the appetizers. The man enters the kitchen and suddenly starts talking to the hostess. He regrets that Bonnie didn't believe her, but she didn't believe Margaret either. He has been waiting a long time for someone to challenge him. The guests sit down at the table. Alice demonstratively takes the host's seat. Jack, complying, sits next to her. The conversation about nothing begins. Suddenly Alice asks why all the women in the town are from one, at most two states, and they all vacation in the same places. Jack tries to steer the conversation away, but Alice continues. They all met their husbands on a train under similar circumstances. All their stories are the same because they are told what to remember, but sometimes they suddenly remember the forbidden. Frank is doing something with all of them. The man, smirking, reminds her of her nervous breakdown. Why isn't she getting treated? And why was she at the headquarters? Jack is horrified. She was at the headquarters? Frank continues. She broke the rules. It's the result of psychosis, but she revealed herself to him in his bedroom. Alice is stunned by such a dreadful lie, but Jack believes Frank unconditionally. The woman tries to appeal to the guest's common sense. Where do these products come from? And what's in them? But then Shelley stands up. She will no longer allow her husband to be insulted. The guests leave. Frank is disappointed. He expected something more interesting from her. Jack, having seen everyone out, returns to the house. Alice tries to convey to him that he is the most precious person to her. And she asks to leave here, anywhere just together. And Jack agrees. They leave the house and get into the car, and then the husband apologizes to his wife, but in the next moment employees pull her out of the car and carry her into the darkness. Alice finds herself on an operating table. Visions with her husband pass by. A doctor in a mask leans over her, in which she recognizes herself. In the next moment, Dr. Alice finishes the operation and goes home, where her unemployed husband meets her. He hasn't prepared dinner because he didn't know what she would want. There's also no hot water. Alice is very tired. She has been standing at the operating table for 30 hours, so she denies her husband intimacy. He sits at the monitor and listens to the advertisement for a new simulation. And again a sunny morning in Paradise Town. Alice returns to her surroundings. An enthusiastic Bonnie meets her and shares the latest news. Alice hugs her children and does not notice her friend's worried look. Her husband goes to work. Alice does household chores, dances, and swims. And she meets her husband. She takes the roast out of the oven while Jack picks a record, humming a song that seems to wake Alice up. Jack walks through the dark city, entering his apartment. Meanwhile, his physical characteristics are narrated. He is absolutely fit to participate in the Victory Project with his friend Alice, and he takes on the responsibility of maintaining his wife's body's vital functions. Alice sees herself in bed, restrained and entangled with wires. Jack cares for her body because he is obliged to exit the simulation each day and work to afford it. The man lies down next to her and hums the song that Alice is hearing now. She realizes he has deprived her of real life, but the man did this to save her from constant work. Frank created this world so they could live as they wanted. He works like a damned soul for this, but she is happy. But what about the others? So they really are hostages. Jack hugs her, but Alice hits him on the head. The next moment, Bonnie finds her. Jack is dead, and she immediately reports it to Frank. Bonnie confesses that she knows everything about the simulation. She chose this life herself because here she can be with her children, who are alive, but other women know nothing. Alice must run, or they will kill her. The woman steps out into the yard, goes to Jack's car, and drives into the desert. Employees chase after her. Cars catch up with her, but Alice, making a maneuver, causes a collision in which a doctor dies. Her pursuers continue the chase. Frank is informed of the incident. He orders the woman to be captured at all costs. In the next moment, Shelley stabs him with a knife. He is a fool and has botched everything. Alice races towards the mountain, but near the summit, her car stalls. She continues on foot. Employees pursue her, and there ahead, the dome. The woman approaches it, her pursuers just steps behind her, and suddenly feels her husband's hands on her shoulders, asking her not to leave him. Shelley reaches out. A strike. Darkness. Visions of the perfect life and victory. And a sigh from a woman waking up in reality. That case when it's hard to take someone's side. The husband deprived his wife of reality with good intentions to make her happy, and probably many would want to escape into the simulation from everyday problems. But can you make someone happy against their will? A spacecraft is departing from Earth with another group of settlers headed for Mars. One of the passengers convinces her daughter to wave goodbye to the planet as they will be apart for a very long time. The well-established route consists of 2 stages. The shuttle docks with the Meteor, a huge spaceship that has everything for comfortable living. And after 3 weeks it delivers the passengers to the colonized planet. A young woman named Emily Grant on the ship serves as a mimorobe, a guide to the world of Mima, the system that allows one to delve into their memories and visions so that the brain does not get bored with the repetitive space scenery. Emily herself loves to remember her walks in the forest, and the visions even allow her to feel her bare feet stepping on the moss. A new neighbor is added to Emily's room, an adult female astronomer. From the huge monitors, the astronomer tells the passengers about the delights of Meteor and that the ship has everything to keep from getting bored: shopping centers, restaurants, and even nightclubs. If desired during the journey, one can work in the water purification department or the seaweed factory, which is necessary for oxygen production. The company pays points which serve as currency for this work. Emily gathers another group for Mima sessions. In the visualization room, there is silence as the mimorobe lays people down on the floor, face down on a special pillow, and launches the system. The glowing screen shimmers with different colors, not showing any pictures. But if the mimorobe needs to know the visions of a specific visitor, she uses a special remote control. Suddenly, an emergency situation occurs on the ship, and the whole group slides to the corner of the room. The passengers exit their cabins in panic to find out what happened. They gather in a large hall where the captain is supposed to make a live broadcast. After gathering his strength, the man makes an announcement. There has been a system failure on the Meteor, and the ship has lost all fuel and drifted off course. The crew believes that it's not a big deal and that by using the gravity of celestial bodies, they will be able to return to Earth. However, the journey will now take a little over 2 years instead of the promised 3 weeks. The outraged passengers disagree with this plan, worrying about their plans without even realizing what lies ahead. Austerity measures are introduced on the ship, but the crew realizes that the supplies will not be enough in any case. At best, there is only enough food for a couple of months. One of the crew members suggests growing algae more actively, which will help them survive. The first 3 weeks of confinement in space pass. The people still don't lose their optimism, but they're already starting to get bored. The Mima becomes the most popular hole as everyone wants to see more than just the infinite universe outside the window, and Emily can't handle it, so she asks the captain for help. In addition, the girl is going through a personal drama, hoping to resume her relationship with one of the crew members, Isabel. Emily asks her neighbor how long it would take to reach the nearest celestial body so that the ship can turn around. The woman initially avoids answering, but then admits that in her opinion all of this is hopeless. There are no points that could help them. The crew just doesn't know how to tell the passengers about it. After hearing this, the mimorobe has a panic attack and runs to her hole to immerse herself in memories of Earth, and also to drink in secret so that the commander would know. The journey has been going on for 3 years already. The people have settled into life on the ship, having come to terms with the length of the flight. Emily goes to a party where she meets Daisy and they decide to alleviate their loneliness together. When the couple retreats to a corridor, Isabel walks by and gives Daisy a cold glance, making it impossible for her to relax. There aren't enough people on the ship to work with the algae and water purification systems. Even young passengers are now being recruited, but the systems can't keep up, and all the drinks have an unpleasant sulfide smell. Strange things also start happening in the ship's hull as the system malfunctions, and Mima, using human language, begs to stop as it can no longer handle passing through people's memories. One of the people lying on the floor starts thrashing around in hysteria, and when Emily connects her remote to him, she sees very unpleasant images in his head. The mimorobe turns to the ship's captain, asking him to let the system rest, but he believes that this is the passenger's only outlet and denies her request. Furthermore, he reprimands the girl for driving customers out of the session. During the next session, Mima repeats its words, and at some point, the laser screen begins to crumble, finally stopping the system's operation. The customers are dissatisfied and blame the mimorobe entirely. The people gather at the door to the hall to hold a memorial for Mima, and the management accuses Emily of what happened. They catch the girl and punish her severely, after which they imprison her along with Isabel, who tried to defend her friend before the management. On the ship, a series of nervous breakdowns with fatal consequences begins, and the commander has no choice but to release everyone who is under guard to take up workstations. Dead bodies are sent into open space as the ship is not equipped to store them. Isabel is sent to work in the logistics department, and Emily returns to teaching, this time with the task of educating the children on board, focusing on space sciences that could help them with their return. During their time in confinement, the Mimorobe and Isabel developed a relationship, so they move in together once they're free. Communities and groups emerge on the ship, each praying in their own way for a return and rescue. At one of the gatherings of a cult-like group, they invite the girls, as Emily was associated with Mima. In a dark room, the friends first become witnesses and then participants in love games, after which Isabel becomes pregnant. The girl falls into depression, fearing that her indulgence will bring another hostage into the situation, but Emily supports her with all her might. She even plans to make a light screen that would replace the dark picture outside the window with earthly landscapes, but the captain forbids wasting resources on such foolishness. The couple has a healthy boy who grows very quickly, but Isabel can't shake the feeling that she shouldn't have done it. While bathing with his son in the pool, she almost commits a terrible act, but fortunately she's distracted by a message from the captain, who urgently invites his former assistant to a meeting. It becomes revealed that after 6 years of travel, a flying machine has finally been detected, and a meeting with it will take place in about a year. Isabel measures the approximate size of the object and understands that it is unlikely to be a rescue ship, but everyone hopes that they will be able to obtain fuel from it to return to their route. Emily comes to the team to be with her girlfriend at such an important moment. The captain joyfully announces the discovery to the passengers, hoping to boost their morale, which he manages to do. To celebrate the occasion, a party is held on the ship, complete with drinks and leftover delicious food. As usual, the commander tries to present himself in the best light by claiming credit for the team's achievements. Throughout the year, everyone diligently trains to release probes and dock, and by the appointed time, everyone is fully prepared for the operation. The docking operation goes perfectly, and the giant space probe is placed in the ship's cargo hold for examination to determine if it contains any fuel and how radioactive it has become during its time in space. The son of Emily and Isabel is growing up, and the couple now has hope that he will see Earth. Due to a lack of peers, the boy is not developing well and hardly speaks. It is not possible to determine the chemical composition of the object because the study methods on the ship are outdated, but work is constantly being done. The captain declares that he does not consider it a mistake to give people hope, as it has brought stability to many. The roommate of Emily gets drunk at the bar and becomes too candid, causing panic to break out on the ship again. The captain takes notice of this and gets rid of the troublemaker at the first opportunity, even sending her body into open space but allowing for a memorial service for Emily. After taking an exhilarating pill, Emily goes to the bar where she meets Daisy and his friends again. The group has a fun time, but another accident occurs on the ship. An unknown object explodes and damages the equipment. Those who were working on the probe in the cargo hold at the time are lost forever. Upon inspection of the damage, the captain orders them to be disposed of while saving any useful clothing. Meanwhile, the Mimorobe returns home and asks Isabel for forgiveness, and it seems that everything is returning to a peaceful state. However, during the conversation, Emily realizes that her friend has developed mental disorders. After putting her son to bed, Emily shares her achievements at work with Isabel. The two women have a nice chat, and Emily is not worried about anything. Wishing her friend a good night, Emily leaves to finally connect the light screen she has long dreamed of creating. Everything works perfectly, and the remaining passengers on the ship marvel at the earthly landscapes with waterfalls and forests outside the window. As she listens to the words of gratitude, Emily plans to create new pictures. Emily runs to her cabin to hear the opinion of her family. She opens the door with the key, but it doesn't budge. Emily tries to fix the lock several times, but then realizes that something is blocking it from the inside. With effort, she finds a belt from a rope on the door handle, and Isabel is nearby. Coming to her senses a few seconds later, Emily runs to her son's room, but there she's met with a terrible sight. It's the 10th year of the journey. The captain gathers the few remaining passengers in the main hall and presents Emily with an award for creating the light screen. As she receives the medal from the commander, the young woman notices traces of a nervous breakdown on his wrist. Giving a speech, the captain tries to appear heroic in this situation and suggested they should be proud that they have gone farther than anyone has gone before. On the 24th year of the journey, only a few people remain alive. Old and wrinkled Emily leads a meeting of the survivors where they pray for strength to be sent to them. The ship has long been powerless and is floating in space like a piece of space junk, and almost 6 million years later, the spacecraft Meteor approaches an unknown planet in the constellation of Lyra. The film takes place in the small town of Vengenberg, where a young girl named Jennifer lives with a skewed face and a disgusting hump in the family of a cowman. Because of her ugly appearance, the girl is constantly mocked by the locals, and one day when Jennifer is once again mocked by a couple of local young men, the girl accidentally opens a portal to the magical Tor Lara in Aretuza, where she's met by the young wizard Istrid. The guy is concerned. All magic leaves traces which wizards can use to find someone who has even an ounce of magic in them. He decides to save the budding sorceress and opens a safe portal that brings Jennifer home. Time later, a beautiful and wealthy lady arrives at the farm of the girl's father to buy a pig. But upon seeing the girl, she expresses a desire to buy her too. And the father, who does not hide his disgust for his daughter, sells her for half the price of the animal, despite the pleas of her mother, who recognizes the lady as a witch. So Jennifer finds herself in the magical school of the enchantress Tisaya of Rees, where several girls are already studying. At first, Jennifer takes the separation from home hard and how low her father judged her. She even tried to commit suicide, but when classes begin, she discovers that the young wizard was right. It was her inadvertent wizardry that caused the wave and caught the attention of the school's rector, the wizardess Tisaya. The girls who study at the school have also distinguished themselves with the same unique skills. Soon Tisaya holds the first test. The girls must lift a stone and a flower without touching them and using a spell. Everyone more or less manages to cope with the task, but Jennifer fails. The girl stubbornly tries again and again until Tisaya stops her. Frustrated, Jennifer runs away. Later, she finds Istrid in the cave and tells him her name. Sometime later, Tisaya trains her female pupils to recognize man's greatest fear. She sees the girls in pairs and orders them to look into each other's eyes until they get inside their rival schemes. Jennifer pairs up to encourage the girl, but she again fails. Tisaya is enraged. Jennifer is useless. And this is because she's lying to herself. Even if she were a beauty, no one would love her. Although she's not the only one to whom she has problems, Jennifer shares the problems with her only friend, Istrid, who talks about her schooling. He too was having a hard time with everything. The boy offers to read his mind, and the girl succeeds. One night, Tisaya wakes the girls in the middle of a storm and takes them to the Tor Lara, the most powerful magic place in the continent, entrance to which is only open to members of the Wizard Brotherhood. Today, there will be a test in the art of controlling the flows of chaos, which requires catching lightning in a bottle. The girls do not believe in such a possibility, and some get strong discharges even after catching the lightning. Jennifer's turn comes, and she reaches up with the bottle, but it is thrown back against the wall. Enraged, she directs her power at her more fortunate opponent, Tisaya, blocking her mental blow. Later, she reprimands her apprentice she almost killed today, which means that her emotions can ruin her own. Tisaya cannot be sure that Jennifer will not go along with her feelings and harm his school, for she's to become a court sorceress, and the weak have no place near a ruler. The enchantress already doubts that there's anything in her that the wizarding chapter needs. Frustrated, Jennifer tells Istrid everything. But most importantly, the enchantress knows all about them and they won't be able to see each other again. The guy is willing to show her other, more ancient and powerful magic, but it is very dangerous. He shows her the skulls of the dead elves who built Aretuza. They were the first wizards of the continent, and they were the ones who built all the magical places. But humans came to the continent and slaughtered them. Istrid gives her a flower that can only grow where the elder blood rests and reads a spell, which by repeating it, the girl opens a portal. The astonished wizard does not understand how she managed to do it the first time, and Jennifer confesses that her real father was a half-elf who died in the purge. It was his blood that made her ugly. The boy kisses Jennifer and confesses his love. Later, she shows Tisaya the flower. It turns out that this was her assignment, to get the plant by applying the skills of false emotion. Jennifer hopes to be elevated. The enchantress promises that she will soon hear a knock and know when it is time. Meanwhile, Istrid is also reporting to his mentor Strigobor about what he has learned about the girl. One night, Jennifer hears a knock at her neighbor's door and, taking the flower, goes after them. She peeks out as Tisaya turns the four of them into eels. The enchantress knows the girl is here and orders her to come out and push her former fellow students into the water. They are now the conduits of magic for Aretusa. Yennefer performs this and then sees many silhouettes of former schoolmates in the water. Time passes. Yennefer enjoys a love affair with Istrid, applying what she has learned to enhance the effect of intimacy. Thus, one day she created a whole crowd that watched her intimacy and then rewarded the lovers with applause. The guy is amazed at her imagination. What will she come up with next time? So the day of the final rite is approaching, after which they will be masters of their own destiny. Yennefer dreams of graduating from Aretusa and returning to her native Aedirn as a powerful sorceress to show her longtime abusers and her father what she's been able to achieve. In addition, all Aretusa graduates are perfected before being sent to the different kingdoms. All physical defects are removed, which awaits Yennefer as well. The wizard in charge shows her his work, the flawless beauty of the graduates, and promises her an equally wonderful result. He suggests making her color a noble but strong gray. Tisai, on the other hand, teaches her to look in the mirror and see what Yennefer herself wants. She orders the girl to close her eyes and imagine the most powerful woman in the world. Yennefer complies with the order but does not yet see the promised beauty. Meanwhile, the chapter of wizards gathers in Aretusa to decide where their graduates should go, for all kings need court wizards. Then it transpires that one of the leaders of the council, the wizard Stregobor, knows that Yennefer is a quarter elf, which means that she will not be accepted at Aretusa, where there is a prejudice against elves. The chapter vows to send Yennefer to Nilfgaard, which the aspiring enchanter does not like. She demands an audience with the chapter, but Tisai declares herself in charge of the distribution. Yennefer is beside herself. She has no intention of wasting her life serving the king of a small southern kingdom and a lover of women. The tutor reminds her of the elven blood, and the girl understands how Stregobor knew about it. The initiation ceremony begins, which Yennefer does not attend. Worried, Istrid finds him behind a letter to her father asking him to confirm that she's his own daughter. The boy does not believe that this letter can convince the chapter. But the girl simply does not know what to do, for even if Istrid disproves his words about her origins, no one will believe him anymore. The enchanter is frustrated. He didn't know why Stregobor needed this information, and she has already missed all the initiation spells. Istrid suggests that she should go with him, for he has been offered to become an explorer. They can travel the continent and discover the unknowable. But unexpectedly, the girl cruelly ridicules his plan. She's not going to dig through the dust of the ages at all, and these are his dreams and intentions, and her opinion, as always, he does not even ask. Istrid is shocked. Yennefer is not at all what he thought she was, and he expresses his opinion that she's angry because she missed her chance to find beauty. But a girl needs power, and she didn't experience so much hardship studying at the magic school for nothing. Yennefer runs to the enchanter, who is in charge of perfection, and demands to show her art. Not even the lack of a potion to dull the terrible pain that accompanies the transformation process stops her. As the magician begins the process, Yennefer asks for her eyes and the cut marks on her hands as a reminder of her former weakness. And the wizard informs her that every magic has a price. Having been reborn, she will not be able to walk. But the girl agrees to everything, even to the removal of her womb necessary for a complete transformation. The magician reads spells, and the girl screams in terrible pain and rips the chains with which she was tied to the table. Her spine straightens, her entire body seems to melt and shift from one form to another. Finally, writhing in pain, Yennefer loses consciousness. Meanwhile, in the main hall of Aretusa, the initiation ball continues. Suddenly, Tisai sees a door opening in which stands an unusually beautiful girl with violet eyes. She realizes that Yennefer has disobeyed her orders and hurries to take her away. But it is too late. The Aedirn ruler has already noticed the beauty. He invites her to a dance where he expresses his desire to see her as court wizard in his kingdom. Tisai has to retreat and only watch the dance of the king and the enchantress from afar. Directed based on a series of books by Sapkowski, The Witcher is quite curious, fascinating and vivid. The atmosphere of magic, the world of monsters and steel swords transferred quite well, so the adventures of the female protagonist will be even more exciting in the next episodes. One day, oceanographer Tom's family, his wife Julia and 2 children, Cassie and Ben, set off on a yacht trip in the Caribbean Sea. While Tom and Ben are busy fishing and Cassie is absorbed in her gadget, Julia goes for a swim. Suddenly something unsettles her. Julia looks around, but the sea remains as calm as ever. However, she feels a distinct sense of dread, as though something large and dangerous is circling around. At the same time, the instruments on the yacht start acting strangely, but Tom, preoccupied with fishing, pays no attention to them. Meanwhile, Julia feels worse and eventually begins to drown. She screams, but the family doesn't hear her. The water seems to shift and pull her farther from the yacht. As the situation becomes critical, Tom finally hears her voice. He rushes to the helm, and the yacht moves toward the distant Julia. Tom dives into the water. With the children's help, they pull her aboard and revive her. Tom is angry, as he always asks that swimmers notify the others when going into the water. Julia apologizes and the incident is soon forgotten. Besides, the family has a reason to celebrate. Today is their son Ben's 13th birthday. Tom lights the candles on the cake and everyone congratulates Ben, who receives gifts, while Cassie takes a group photo of the happy family. At that moment, Cassie's boyfriend calls her. He asks her about the swim, but suddenly a sudden and intense storm begins in the background. Cassie is worried, but her boyfriend reassures her that he's safe. The connection cuts off. Cassie tells her parents about the storm on land, but then everyone feels some jolts, rushes to the deck, and sees massive whale carcasses surfacing around the yacht. Tom explains that sometimes whales get disoriented during storms, but these animals are pushing the yacht, threatening their safety. Tom dives into the water and soon returns aboard, injured. While trying to figure out what's going on, he cut himself on the propeller. Julia stitches up the cut on her husband's shoulder, and he explains that the yacht's shafts seem bent, likely from a tail strike. Now they're unlikely to be able to sail away. Later, Cassie tries to re-establish communication, but there's no signal. The radio isn't picking up any signals either. Tom begins calculating their supplies. There's enough water for about 4 days, no more, but they're on a shipping route, so someone is bound to find them. However, ominous sounds come from outside, and when the family steps out onto the deck, they see glowing objects falling from the sky. They fall closer and closer, and Tom, taking a risk, starts the engine. He manages to steer the yacht away from the next meteorite, but the engine is finally damaged. The next object falls so close that the family can see they are artificial satellites of Earth. A strong wind starts blowing, and the instruments go haywire. The terrified family hides inside the yacht, which is being tossed by the waves. They put on life jackets and prepare for the worst when a strange, ringing sound is heard, causing nosebleeds and nausea. Tom tries to signal for help with a flare gun, but it's all in vain. The family barely survives the night. In the morning, they were relieved to find themselves alive, but there's a gaping hole in the side of the yacht, and it's unclear why they're still afloat. The family goes outside and freezes in amazement. The water is gone, and their boat is standing on a rocky outcrop in the middle of a stony desert where the ocean once was. Sometime later, Tom tries to reassure his family, saying that not everyone could have perished. He takes measurements and realizes that the compass is lying. North isn't where it's supposed to be. This means the Earth's poles have shifted. Such a thing has happened on Earth before, but a long time ago. It turns out that the sea has retreated to where the land used to be, and most likely humanity has perished. Cassie can't bear this revelation and runs to the cabin, asking to be left alone. Julia goes to inventory the remaining supplies, while Ben releases a bunch of colorful balloons into the sky, hoping survivors will come to their aid. Meanwhile, Tom turns on the radio, sending out distress signals. Unexpectedly, he hears a response. It's from Naoto, the captain of a small submersible. They were deep underwater when the catastrophe happened, and that's why they survived. However, all communication systems have failed, and expecting help is futile. According to his calculations, the sea will return in about a week, and it will be harsh, so the man advises them to find higher ground and stay there. Julia orders the children to pack their things. Tom directly asks the captain if he can save their children. Naoto explains that the submersible is very small. Unfortunately, Naoto's partner died, and he can only take one person. After some persuasion, Tom convinces Naoto to take both children, and he provides his coordinates. Tom charts a course on the nautical map and promises to reach the location in a couple of days. The next morning, the family is almost ready to embark on their journey. Tom steps onto the deck and suddenly sees a man with a dog approaching. He walks toward him and greets him, but notices that the man is injured. He offers the traveler some water. The man drinks it and then suddenly punches Tom in the face, which Julia sees. She rushes to her husband as the traveler plunges a makeshift spear into Tom's chest. The dog keeps Julia at bay, though she freezes in horror herself. Realizing there's no saving her husband, she runs to the yacht. The man pursues her, injuring her arm. Nevertheless, Julia climbs onto the deck, and the children, hearing her screams, run to her aid. Together, they barricade the doors to the cabin. After that, Julia hides Cassie and Ben in a locker, giving her daughter the flare gun and instructing her to shoot only as a last resort. Meanwhile, the killer tries to break down the doors and eventually succeeds. Julia hides in the bathroom, patching up her wound. Entering, the intruder heads straight to the galley and grabs some food. It's clear that he's very hungry. Holding a can of food, the man begins searching the yacht while Julia arms herself with a kitchen knife. He enters the cabin, but the woman jumps overboard, hiding beneath the yacht. The killer peers through the hole but doesn't see her. However, the dog attacks Julia, forcing her to kill it. The man hears the yelp, goes outside, and finds the dog's body. Meanwhile, Julia climbs back onto the yacht through the portholes on the opposite side. She falls straight into the killer's hands. He beats her, throws her onto a couch, and grabs her throat, intending to strangle her. Cassie witnesses all this and realizes it's the last resort. She opens the locker and fires at the man. The shot throws him to the side, but the flare sets the yacht on fire. Julia orders the children to flee while she sneaks into the galley. The killer, only injured, tries to attack again. Julia kicks him away, grabs the packed bags, and jumps overboard, where Ben finds his father's body. Cassie runs to the corpse and sobs over it. Julia kisses her deceased husband, but seeing the killer leap from the burning yacht, she takes the children and leaves. The boat explodes behind them. The family runs across the stony desert and soon takes shelter in a rocky canyon, where a stream flows. However, the water is salty and undrinkable. Cassie shares a small amount of water with her brother, but he refuses to drink. The boy feels guilty, believing the killer came because he saw the balloons. Cassie also voices this thought, but Julia orders her to stop and defends her son, explaining that he didn't mean any harm. She tells the children to gather themselves, as a long journey awaits. And then she spots the killer again, still relentlessly following their trail. The family hurries onward. That evening, Ben finds the carcass of a hammerhead shark and tries to butcher it. But Julia sees the pursuer and orders the children to run. They soon come across a field of once flooded toxic waste barrels, but Julia urges the children forward despite the threat of contamination, knowing the killer is still on their heels. The family walks along the former ocean floor, weaving through piles of plastic and other trash dumped by humans. Soon, Julia notices that Ben is severely dehydrated and gives him the last drops of water. Cassie has a breakdown, convinced that they have no chance of survival, but Julia commands them to keep moving. Eventually, they find the fuselage of a plane that crashed into the sea long ago and crawl inside to rest. Julia examines the last photo of their family and recounts the story of her first meeting with Tom, which happened at her hospital, where Tom was brought with decompression sickness after a failed dive. The children weep, remembering their father and saying their final goodbyes to him. At night, Cassie is awakened by a noise and steps outside to sit near the plane. Out of the darkness, the killer approaches her, unaware that the girl is acting as bait. As he prepares to grab her, Julia ambushes him, stabbing the man with a knife. At dawn, the family prepares to continue their journey, only to discover the killer's body has been scavenged. A sign that something even more dangerous than humans lurks in the desert. They move on. Julia consults the map when Ben suddenly rushes ahead. His mother yells for him to stop, but the boy sprints toward a salty puddle and manages to drink a few gulps. Julia drags him away, but the boy becomes sick. Soon they come across some plastic chairs and build a makeshift shelter from the sun, resting inside it. Suddenly, Julia hears strange sounds. She steps outside and sees something that forces her to wake the children. Realizing the new danger, they begin running. Soon they spot a large ship in the distance, surrounded by crashed containers and a few wandering people. Julia calls out to them, but they, seeing thousands of giant crabs, dash into a container and lock the doors, ignoring her pleas for help. The three climb onto a container, though the crabs manage to wound Julia in the leg. Nevertheless, Julia, Cassie, and Ben sit on top, watching the crabs penetrate through a crack in the doors, killing everyone inside despite the people's attempts to fend them off. Julia ties a scarf around her leg and passes out. The next morning, she wakes up alone, terrified, and calls for the children. But it turns out the crabs have moved on, and the children had gone down to search for food and weapons. Julia cauterizes her wound while Ben examines the found weapons. Searching through the containers, they find a small amount of food and water. In the pocket of one of the deceased, Julia finds a radio and contacts Naoto. He responds, explaining that he was also attacked by deep-sea arthropods. Based on his observations, the sea will return soon, which is why the creatures have emerged. Julia begs him to save her children, but she's unsure where to go because she's lost the map. Naoto fires a flare. Ben sees the direction, and the family rushes toward it. Soon they see a yellow submarine in the distance, but reaching it is difficult due to the terrain of the former seabed. Cassie dislikes her mother's talk about saving the children, but Julia refuses to answer and pushes the family onward. They are forced to pass through a canyon contaminated with toxic waste. At one point they are caught in a rock slide, and Julia becomes separated from the children. She orders them to continue, and when Cassie refuses, Julia pleads with her to save her brother. Cassie and Ben make it out of the canyon and reach the submarine, but inside, there's no one. Suddenly, Naoto, badly wounded, emerges from behind the boat. He admits that he has no chance of surviving and orders them to climb aboard, but Cassie goes back for her mother, who is fending off the emerging crabs. Her bullets nearly depleted, Cassie climbs the rock barrier and extends her hand to her mother. They manage to reach the submarine just as the crabs overrun Naoto, who dies in their claws. The family climbs aboard, and just then an ocean wave crests over the horizon. The water lifts the submarine and drags it across the rocks, and as Julia watches everything that happened over the past few days flash before her eyes, she passes out. When she awakens, she finds the vessel at a standstill. Julia opens the hatch, and the family emerges to find themselves in a ruined city carried there by the wave. Despite a great concept, the film failed to make an impact, largely due to the many mistakes made by its creators. The movie begins in Leningrad in 1940. A young woman named Anya works as a seamstress in a factory where a young machinist, Vasily, who is very serious, notices her and even asks her to introduce him to her only relative, her brother Peter. However, Anya asks for a little more time, and the young man agrees to wait until the next day. But as the girl leaves for her lunch break, he quietly follows her, admiring her. Anya walks down the street, looking at a dirigible hovering above, from which German journalists are filming the city below. At this moment, a tram driven by Peter pulls up to an intersection. Suddenly, Anya realizes that a fast-moving truck is about to crash into the tram, and her brother will likely perish. Frozen in fear, she suddenly emits light waves that lift the truck into the air and throw it away from the intersection. The tram's windows shatter, injuring people, but a major accident is averted. This entire incident is captured on film by the journalists in the dirigible. As the shocked people try to recover, Peter jumps out of the tram, grabs Anya, and quickly takes her away. The girl regains consciousness in their shared room. Peter packs their belongings, urging his sister to flee Leningrad, although she is reluctant since they have already had to move several times due to her supernatural abilities manifesting at the most inappropriate times and attracting the attention of the authorities. Peter asks her to control her powers, but Anya is unable to master them as they are beyond her control. At that moment, representatives of the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs burst into the room and arrest the siblings. An investigator named Ivan arrives at the scene. He interviews the victims, and one of the women recalls the strange girl standing at the crossroad. Back at the office, Ivan begins interrogating Anya, but she cannot provide any concrete information. She insists it was just an unfortunate accident, and then Ivan shows her photos from their previous residences where strange incidents and destruction occurred, prompting the siblings to move hastily. The investigator is willing to believe she is not a criminal, especially since he has also witnessed something very strange in his life. However, Ivan is unable to elaborate as his superior, Petrov, who turns out to be his father-in-law, takes Anya and leads her to the secret facilities managed by Professor Ilyinsky. The scientist welcomes the girl, explaining that she is special and now they will study her abilities. However, Anya refuses to cooperate until she sees her brother, and Ilyinsky promises to arrange a meeting for them. Meanwhile, Ivan cannot calm down, although Petrov, who is also his father-in-law, demands he forget the incident and focus on other matters. He had already barely managed to suppress his absurd report about an incident in Madrid. Returning home, Ivan tries to tell everything to his wife Vera, but she asks him to take a vacation and forget everything that happened. The action shifts to 1936. A group of Soviet soldiers, including Ivan, engages in battle with Spanish fascists in Madrid. Suddenly, a man in a strict coat and hat, wearing a strange mask, appears before them. Looking at the soldiers, he utters something incomprehensible, after which Ivan's comrades start shooting themselves one by one. Only Ivan finds the strength to shoot at the man in the mask. The man quickly disappears, leaving Ivan amidst his fallen comrades. The year is 1940. A man in a mask named Neumann and his assistant Katerina arrive in Munich, where the woman meets a Jewish boy named Baruch on the street who plays chess brilliantly. She offers him a ride with them, noting he can always leave if he does not like their school. An orphan agrees and gets into the car, where Neumann utters several hissing words, causing Baruch to fall asleep instantly. Neumann agrees that the boy is brilliant, but by no means possesses superpowers. However, Katerina is determined to help the boy. Meanwhile in Moscow, Professor Ilyinsky leads Anya to the laboratory where she will be studied, and fulfilling his promise, brings her to a cell to see her brother. Peter again asks her not to show her abilities, and she promises to write to him. Baruch is brought to an ancient castle owned by Neumann. The boy is laid in a hammock in a hall inhabited by many other teenagers, but when the adults leave, he wakes up and is frightened by the dark silhouettes surrounding him. Back in Moscow, Professor Ilyinsky leads Anya to a separate room, more like a cell, and locks her in there. He then reports to Petrov that he has never seen anything like it. The girl is a scientific discovery, a unique case, to which the chief objects. She is a new weapon. Later, Anya is subjected to various tests, but she shows nothing special. Ivan cannot forget the incident, studying everything related to the strange explosion. The video footage of the accident also reaches Neumann, and he decides to fly to the USSR. There, the man is taken to meet with Professor Ilyinsky. Neumann introduces himself as a worker from the Ahnenerbe organization and immediately determines that the professor is terminally ill. He offers to ease his pain if the professor allows him to speak with Anya. Ilyinsky does not believe in his abilities, but Neumann utters something, and glowing waves emanate from him, enveloping the professor, causing him to lose consciousness. Taking advantage of this, Neumann searches his desk and takes some papers. Soon, Ilyinsky regains consciousness, but strangely feels no pain. He agrees to arrange a meeting with Anya and leads the German to the laboratory. Neumann approaches the girl and secretly shows her an execution order for her brother. Then waves of unprecedented force begin to emanate from the girl, literally blowing up the entire laboratory. Neumann grabs her and escapes. Ivan sees from the window a man in a hat whom he immediately recognizes and runs to the laboratory where explosions are heard. But Neumann and the girl are nowhere to be found. The narrative shifts to 1924. In a remote Karelian village, a woman lives with two children, Peter and Anya. One day they go with the village boys into the forest. Suddenly a pack of wolves leaps out at the children. The children freeze in fear, but waves emanate from Anya, scattering the beasts. When the men arrive at the clearing, they find the girl dead. 1940. Petrov enters the devastated laboratory, where people connected by tubes into a single organism and marked with the letter M lie in chairs. At first glance, this structure was not damaged by the explosion, as the injured Ilyinsky lying nearby confirms. The professor reports that Anya caused all this and refuses to continue the experiments. Then, Petrov shoots him. Afterward, he goes to Ilyinsky's colleague, who everyone simply calls Professor Lyubov. Petrov asks her to activate the M squad. Learning about the professor's death, the woman refuses to help Petrov, but he reminds her of her family, and Lyubov reluctantly agrees. On the train, a customs officer searches Neumann's compartment and finds an iron sarcophagus with Anya inside. Unsure of what to do, he goes for help. Meanwhile, Anya envisions her own funeral following the incident with the wolves. Frightened, she comes to, and Neumann informs her that he is saving her. Anya tries to run, but the customs officers, who decided to detain the strange German, stop her. However, he utters something, and the military personnel bring their pistols to their own heads. Neumann and Anya leave. At the same time in Moscow, Petrov reports to his colleagues that a member of the Ahnenerbe, which translates to ancestral heritage, Neumann has stolen a valuable exhibit from the USSR, the girl Anya. A squad has already been formed to pursue the German and will depart in a matter of days. Learning of this, Ivan requests to be included, but Petrov, feeling sorry for his daughter, refuses to do so. Neumann leads Anya to a spot where Katerina's car is waiting, and she drives the pair to the castle. It is apparent that the woman does not like Neumann's new toy, but he immediately says that Anya is just like him. At the castle, they are greeted by children whom Neumann calls his army. Anya is escorted to her room, and Neumann finds a guest in his office, Admiral Canaris, who is very interested in the scientist's research. But today he has come to express his displeasure with Neumann's sabotage in the USSR, as it could start a war. Neumann reassures him and invites him to a formal dinner. Meanwhile, Anya is startled by a sound and sees Baruch in her room, trying to open her window to escape the castle. But Katerina and Neumann appear and stop him. While Katerina takes the boy away, Neumann tries to convince Anya that the castle is a paradise, and no one wants to leave of their own volition. Katerina brings Baruch to a bedroom, reminding him that he must speak only German and not tell anyone his real name if he wants to live. But when she leaves, the other teenagers attack him. In Moscow, Ivan asks his wife to help him get enrolled in the squad, after which he goes to Professor Lyubov. He is interested in whether hypnosis can make a person do what another wants. The professor asks him not to travel to Germany, but he is determined to find the man in the mask. In the castle, Anya finds Baruch hanging. The boy tries to explain that the others hate him and beat him, therefore he wants to run away. But Anya admits that it was the same for her until she became strong, and he can too. Later they find Neumann in the park, who promises Anya he will teach her to control her power. He explains that he inherited the castle from the person who adopted him, and now it serves as a refuge. He has set up Anya's room according to her taste and hopes she will like it here. Grateful, Anya sits down at the sewing machine, unexpectedly remembering how the villagers burned their house, calling her a witch. Then her brother saved her, though their mother died in the fire. Back in Moscow, Petrov enrolls Ivan in the squad and asks the commander to ensure that he does not return. Leningrad, 1937. Returning from Madrid, Ivan writes in his report everything he witnessed, but Petrov does not believe him, noting that if the soldiers shot themselves, they could be declared deserters. Tired of trying to convince the young man, Petrov takes him to Professor Lyubov. 1940. A special forces unit travels to Germany in a grain car. Ivan warns his comrades about Neumann's peculiarities, but it seems they don't quite believe him. At the castle, the children undergo daily training, while Anya enjoys the long-forgotten peace. In the morning, Katerina brings her a box with a new dress sent by Neumann for her to wear at his birthday party. The girl goes out to the hall where the children are preparing decorations for the evening, and then they head to training. Baruch is afraid of heights and falls from a rope ladder, but no one pities him. After that, it's time for shooting practice, but the boy throws his pistol down and runs to the local cemetery where Neumann finds him. Baruch asks to be let go, but the scientist promises to teach him not to be afraid. Meanwhile, Squad M climbs out of the wagon, and Ivan remembers his training in 1936 before being sent to Madrid. Then his comrades met him coldly because he was the boss's son-in-law, but Ivan earned respect through hard work and cleverness. And now he is on a special mission. Suddenly, they are hailed by an old man who turns out to be their liaison and must take them to the castle. At the same time, Petrov is informed that the squad has successfully crossed the border. Guests start arriving at the castle. Neumann welcomes Canaris and escorts him to the hall where music plays, and ladies and gentlemen drink and talk about the beautiful evening. Neumann himself is enchanted by Anya's beauty, and she gives him a hand-embroidered handkerchief she made for him. Later, guests deliver laudatory speeches in honor of the birthday boy, and he invites Anya to dance to the envy of the present ladies. Canaris notices Katerina's displeasure, but the woman remains cold, rejecting his advances. She dislikes Canaris's interest in their wards, and he tells her that people are already coming for Anya from the USSR. Squad M reaches the forest house of their liaison, who supplies them with weapons and draws a path on a map, but then shots ring out. German soldiers have caught up with the saboteurs. A battle ensues and the Russians win. Later, the commander finishes off the wounded enemies and, unexpectedly for Ivan, shoots the liaison, indicating that they have no orders to return. At the castle, Canaris agrees to play chess with Baruch, and the boy wins. The admiral admires his genius, but upon learning that the boy is Jewish, he pulls out a pistol. Anya sees the man aiming at the child, and her powers activate. Guests watch in horror as everything in the hall begins to rise into the air. The admiral himself is lifted up, but at that moment Neumann grabs the girl by the shoulder. She faints, and Canaris falls to the floor. Everything stops immediately, but people scream and scatter. The furious admiral orders all children to be destroyed within 3 days and departs. Neumann escorts Anya to her room and admires her because today she managed to stop. The girl does not understand why it is necessary to destroy the Jews, and Neumann reminds her that no one pitied them either, as they were not like everyone else. The man returns to his office where Katerina awaits him, but he does not accept her attentions because he is seriously captivated by Anya and hopes to succeed with her. However, Katerina is saddened by this turn in their relationship and reminds him of Canaris's order, but Neumann intends to make a profitable deal. The action shifts to Neumann's childhood when children laughed at him and drove him away. His parents were forced to put a mask with a digital lock on him so he couldn't harm anyone, and the boy suffered greatly from this. One day his father complained to the landlord that his son was hindering his ability to fulfill his duties as a tenant, and the man came to see the unusual child. They explained to him that Neumann scared all the guests and caused his father to lose a finger. The year is 1940. The morning after the dinner, Anya goes out to the hall, but the servants who witnessed yesterday's incident look at her warily. Then the girl goes to the park where she is met by an armed Katerina, but seeing the guards, she returns to the house. Later, Neumann conducts a meditation for the teenagers, asking Thor to give them strength. Anya sees this and asks for permission to start training. Neumann orders Katerina to stay at the castle and wait for guests, and he takes Anya away. Meanwhile, the squad continues to move through the forest. Soon they find a rubber boat at the prearranged place. Neumann puts Anya on his personal plane and takes her to his parents' house. Landing, they walk across a bridge and suddenly Neumann asks the girl to remember her brother. Her powers activate. Water rises up, carrying fish and creating a reverse waterfall. But then the man calls her. Anya comes to her senses and everything returns to normal. However, now she can use her powers when she needs to. Soon they enter an old house and Neumann recalls how he was taken from his father's home. Lastly, his mother writes down the password to his mask on a piece of paper, and little Neumann leaves their lives forever. In the present, he tells that his father was a harsh and cruel man, often beating him and his mother, so he promised himself that his child would never be unhappy. The man remembers how his patron removed his mask and wanted to throw it away, but Neumann did not allow it. The man informed him that he would now take care of him, but he must trust him. Soon they arrived at the castle, where the patron confessed that every person has the right to be happy, and the boy lived for the first time like a normal child. But a year later, war came. His patron went away on business, and their home turned into a hospital. Neumann helped as best he could. Once he had to assist in the amputation of a leg. The soldier was in great pain, and then Neumann activated his powers and relieved the poor man of his suffering during the operation. Later he confessed to one of the nurses that he loved her. The adult woman laughed at the boy but said she loved him too. But one day he caught his nurse with one of the recovering soldiers, and in a fit of rage he made the soldier kill himself with a hammer. They caught him, gagged him, tied him up, and took him away from the castle. In 1940 he tells Anya that his parents died, so he is so happy to have found her. The girl lights candles in the fireplace, using her new powers, which delights Neumann. They drink wine and then become close. At night, Anya dreams where Baruch dies and wakes up terrified. She asks Neumann to return to the castle. Meanwhile, the squad reaches the river. One of the soldiers is wounded and runs out of strength. Then he takes his own life so as not to be a burden to his comrades. Only 3 remain, but they still row towards the castle. And there Katerina, who can't sleep, reminisces about the past when she helped her mother, who worked in a psychiatric hospital, where one day they brought in a tied-up boy named Neumann. She then freed him, and he promised never to harm her. The year is 1936, Leningrad. Petrov attends a lecture by Professor Ilyinsky, where he discusses a significant discovery in the field of controlling human memory and emotions. Ilyinsky's colleague, Professor Lubov, is inspired by the future changes, as people with good mental health will be able to work better and create a brilliant future for themselves and their children. The Project M envisions a new society where happy people with immense productivity and willpower will live. Petrov asks about the use of these discoveries in the military sphere, arguing that if a new society is to be built, it must be able to defend itself. However, Lyubov categorically opposes totalitarianism. After the lecture, Petrov offers Ilyinsky full support for their program if he agrees to operate under military auspices. But Ilyinsky sends him to Lyubov as the ideational inspiration behind the project. However, the woman flatly refuses to cooperate with the military. That same day, she is hit by a car in the street. Later, Petrov returns to Ilyinsky, informing him of the unfortunate accident with his colleague, and Ilyinsky reluctantly agrees to cooperate. Again, 1940-year Germany. The three remaining members of the squad reach the castle's territory. Surprised by the lack of security, they enter the premises. Petrov receives a summary of incidents in a specific area of Germany and realizes that everything is going according to plan. His boss is horrified. His people have left a very noticeable trail, which could easily lead to the USSR being accused of provocation. But Petrov assures him that everything was planned this way and there will be no international conflict. At that moment, his daughter calls and he rushes home. The squad members reach the castle and, splitting up, begin to explore the premises. Meanwhile, Petrov finds Vera in a hysterical state. She is going mad with worry for her husband, and the father decides to take action. At the same time in the castle, Katerina reads a book to the children, and seeing her nervousness, they calm the woman. She orders lights out and leaves, just as Ivan enters the hall from the other side. Seeing the children in front of him, the man lowers his weapon and leaves. The children remain motionless. The soldiers continue to explore the castle, and now the squad leader enters the hall with the children. But he does not lower his weapon and prepares to shoot. Then the children attack first. The commander fires in all directions, but the teenagers throw their clothes at him and knock him down. The eldest orders the pistol handed to Baruch to kill the enemy, but the boy cannot shoot the man, and the man manages to wound him with a knife before being killed. The children carry the bleeding Baruch to the bedroom, leaving the soldier's body on the hall floor. The third squad member, a female warrior, finds Katerina's office and engages her in a shootout. Katerina flees, but the woman catches up to her, and they fight. The woman is defeated when Katerina pushes her away. Seeing her opponent unconscious, the German grabs a pistol but doesn't manage to shoot because Ivan appears. Threatening him with a pistol, the woman captures him. In Moscow, Petrov brings his daughter to Professor Lyubov and asks her to erase the girl's memory. Lyubov is outraged by this request, as the love for a husband is the most precious thing in Vera's life. However, under military pressure, she agrees and performs the necessary manipulations, while Petrov's subordinates methodically clear their apartment of photographs and items belonging to Ivan. But one photograph falls under a chest of drawers, and the soldier does not notice it. After the procedure, the girl regains consciousness but does not remember her husband at all. At this time, the teenagers attack Ivan, not noticing Katerina, and wound him in the arm. The woman drives off the aggressive children and escorts the wounded man to Neumann's office, where she admits to Ivan that she recognized him because she had seen him in Madrid. He asked why her master kidnapped Anya. Could it be that he wants to use her in the war? Katerina assures him that he still doesn't understand. People are petty and greedy creatures fighting for power. Neumann is unique. He is ready to seize all power on Earth to save the world from war. Meanwhile, Neumann and Anya arrive at the castle and find a wounded woman on the threshold. The scientist finishes her off with a pistol while Anya runs to the bedroom to the teenagers and finds Baruch dead. At this time, Ivan is bandaging himself while Katerina explains that they teach the children survival by developing their skills, because their destiny is to save the world under Neumann's leadership. The woman offers to help him escape if he will help her, but before Ivan can hear her out, Neumann enters the door. The Russian immediately picks up a pistol and takes the woman hostage. However, the German informs him that he does not care about her fate, which visibly upsets her. At that moment, Anya runs into the office and uses her power to knock Ivan off his feet, but when she recognizes the man, Neumann quickly takes her away, leaving the Russian with Katerina. In Moscow, Professor Lyubov mourns Ilyinsky when Petrov brings her folders with the names of the condemned, whom she can save by including them in Squad M. She remembers how after the accident, Ilyinsky came to her in the hospital. The man was shocked to learn that she had been mutilated by the military, but he was frightened and could not refuse to cooperate. Now the woman is alone and forced to make difficult decisions. She takes out a vial of M activator and recalls Ivan's story about the man in the mask. After his return from Madrid, she worked with his memory, suggesting removing the traumatic memories of his comrades' deaths, but Ivan refused to erase his life. And now the young man is chained in a cell in the castle of the man in the mask. Later, Anya visits him, accusing him of killing Baruch, but the boy denies it, and he is not particularly interested in her fate. He only wants to destroy Neumann because all evil comes from him. he hypnotizes children, turning them into killers. Their conversation is interrupted by Nauman's appearance. After sending Anya away, he thanks the young man for revealing his vulnerability, as he is the only one who could stand up to him. To prove it, the scientist shows the finger shot off by Ivan in Madrid. He too is special, and Nauman really wants the Russian to join his side. Yes, he killed his friends, but it was war. He came to Annanerba to find gifted people. Anya is like him, and they are the future. He asks Ivan to admit why he is immune to his hypnosis. Then Ivan reveals that there is a whole squad like him. Squad M. There are many of them, and they will all be here soon. So Nauman cannot hide. After talking with Ivan, Nauman finds Anya in the castle's backyard. The girl asks him to hand over all affairs to Katerina and to leave this place forever. But Nauman does not want to run because they are extraordinary people, and when they are together they are unbeatable. He asks for her help in defending their new home. Later he thanks Katerina for managing the situation and confesses that he is glad she was not hurt during the Russian raid. Meanwhile, Anya remembers how in Moscow she wrote letters to her brother while locked up in the laboratory. She used to give them to the professor, but she could not have imagined that he read her letters to Peter, who was undergoing mental processing as a participant in Squad M. At this time she burns them in the backyard of the castle, hoping that life will give her a chance to start over. Later, the castle's inhabitants conduct a funeral rite for Baruch. The teenagers carry the boy's body to the seashore, where the cemetery is located, and burn it on a ritual pyre. Anya is shocked by the number of children's graves and realizes that Ivan was telling the truth. Katerina urges her to leave and save herself. Anya runs to Ivan's cell and asks him to tell her what he saw in Madrid that was so special. The boy talks about the death of his comrades and Nauman's chilling whisper, but the German doesn't know that he just had a misfire. He is not special and survived only because of the pistol's malfunction, but if Nauman finds out, he will kill him immediately. And only Anya can stand up to him. Out of the darkness comes Katerina, who has heard everything. She will let them go if they leave forever. Nauman is planning to sell the children to Canaris, and Anya can do nothing about it. They are weapons, and it is high time the Russian understood this. But Anya runs away while Katerina frees Ivan from his chains and advises him to make sure the German never finds them. Meanwhile in Moscow, Petrov enjoys his daughter's good mood, hoping she will meet another man, marry, and give him grandchildren. The girl is lively and cheerful, unaware that the photo under the dresser awaits its moment. At this time, Nauman orders the Russian man to be killed, and he goes to look for Anya. Meanwhile, Katerina leads Ivan to her car, where Nauman's guard catches up with them. He engages in a fight with the Russian, and when he is about to kill him, Katerina attacks the guard. The guard is much stronger, and Katerina has to shoot. The teenagers hear the sound and run into the courtyard while Katerina puts Ivan in the car and drives him away from the estate. Nauman finds Anya at the cemetery. The girl asks him to let the children go, but he refuses. They are insignificant to him because he hopes to build a new world using their combined powers. Moreover, they will definitely have a son who will be the strongest and greatest on the planet. Hearing this, Anya wants to leave. Then Nauman sees Katerina's car and realizes what she is about to do. He puts on his quantum mask, which greatly amplifies the power of his voice, and begins to speak while Ivan stands on the car step and aims an assault rifle at him. The mask works. Katerina's car loses control and crashes from a high cliff into the water, but Ivan manages to jump from the step and survives. Then, members of the second Squad M, who were heading to the castle, covering for the distracting maneuvers of the first squad, open fire on Nauman. But the soldiers are programmed for total destruction, and one of them engages in a fight with Ivan, not realizing he is an ally. The young man has to kill the soldier. Nauman asks Anya to activate her power, and the girl begins to do so when she recognizes one of the soldiers as her brother. Nauman is knocked down by her force, rocks crash from the sky, and the girl runs to Peter, realizing that this time he is indeed dead. Anya's powers activate again when Nauman falls from Ivan's shot. The girl mourns her brother as teenagers appear on the road. Ivan grabs Anya and drags her away while the children pick up Nauman's body and carry it into the castle. The Russians run to the airplane and manage to take off at the last moment. 9 months later, Nauman, who survived the injury, listens to Hitler's speeches and experiments with a new kind of influence on people, broadcasting his voice through radio equipment. Meanwhile, in Anya's native village, a bearded Ivan arrives from the woods as his woman is about to give birth. Pregnant Anya is dragged into the village where women come to help. As the birth proceeds, an announcement about the start of the war with Germany is broadcast from the speakers. Later, surrounded by streams of power, Anya gives birth to a healthy baby boy. Neumann is immediately informed by a fortune-telling girl. Then one of the villagers recognizes Anya and hurries to tell his fellow villagers whom they have just helped. But Ivan stops him when bombers appear in the sky, from which a large number of paratroopers descend. The creation of the International Space Station served as a symbol of the establishment of relations between the Soviet Union and the United States of America following the end of the Cold War. This unique scientific research center, located in Earth's orbit, has become a facility for solving tasks in the most extensive areas, from medicine to the technology of producing new substances and materials. Moreover, astronauts from different countries, regardless of the relations between their states on Earth, coexist on board. People are delivered to the ISS via the Soyuz space shuttle. One day, biologist Kira and engineer Christian are sent to the station, where 4 cosmonauts are already present. As Soyuz enters orbit, the Flight Control Center congratulates the pair, who are eagerly awaiting docking, joking about the Russian tradition of knocking on the door 3 times before opening it. Finally, the newcomers are greeted by their new teammates, American Gordon and Russian cosmonauts Nika, and brothers Nikolai and Alexei. Kira is amazed by the weightlessness and has to adjust to this new way of existence. Despite the language barrier and cultural differences, Americans and Russians get along well. Nika teaches Kira new Russian words commonly exchanged on the station. Then the woman is settled into her section. Gordon shows ways to get comfortable for the night. Personally, he sleeps in a bag, but some prefer a free flight. The woman immediately gets to work, placing the mice she brought with her into cages. Alexei helps her and explains that they also had many mice, but they cannot live in space as there's nothing for them to hold on to. In the evening, the astronauts have a festive dinner where each shares stories about their place of birth and they sing popular songs together. The only rule on the station is not to talk about politics. The newcomers distribute gifts from loved ones and souvenirs brought from Earth. Then Kira looks at Earth from the space station for the first time, and her colleagues explain the main effect of the view. From here, borders are invisible, and all of humanity is united and indivisible. Later, Nika helps Kira get ready for the night, as the first night is the hardest. But in the morning, the woman wakes up in excellent spirits, which is spoiled when she sees the mice in poor condition. Distraught, Kira looks at Earth and suddenly notices numerous flashes in the United States. She calls the others, and people realize that a nuclear war has started on the planet. Gordon orders everyone to immediately leave the dome and closes the shutters. Communication on board the station is interrupted, but everything works in normal mode. Then Gordon receives a written message from Houston stating that an act of aggression has occurred between Russia and America, and he must take control of the station by any means necessary. Later, he discusses this message with Kira and Christian, who suspect that the Russians received a similar order from their government. Nevertheless, people decide to wait at least a day before taking any action. But then, Nika reports a problem with the thrust. It turns out that the station is in too low an orbit and could fall to the Earth's surface unless the center makes system adjustments. The first tension among the astronauts begins to arise, as each thinks of their family left below. Nikolai informs the crew that the radio may not work because the antenna outside the station is broken, and it can only be fixed manually. Gordon goes out into space. Nika helps him put on his spacesuit and kisses the man goodbye, making it clear that their relationship is more than just professional. Once in open space, Gordon sees Earth engulfed in flames and asks Kira not to let anyone near the windows. Then he begins his work. To distract her colleague from negative thoughts, Kira asks Gordon about his relationship with Nika. He admits that he met her here, in space, and changes the topic to Kira's personal life. She shares that she spent 7 years studying organ replacement but faced failure, though everything might work out in zero gravity. Meanwhile, Alexei listens to their conversation and then cuts the wire. While Christian tries to find the reason for the loss of communication, the Russian cosmonaut replaces the damaged wire with another piece that looks intact, so the American finds nothing wrong. Gordon, meanwhile, approaches the antenna, for which he has to unhook the overly short safety tether. He realizes that the antenna is fine, then a mechanical arm starts moving, threatening the astronaut's safety. It turns out to be Nikolai's doing, without the knowledge of Alexei and Nika. Gordon tries to call out to Kira, but the mechanical arm knocks him off the station's surface and throws him into open space. Nika and Kira try to see the astronaut through the windows, then put on spacesuits and rush to the airlock, but upon extending the rescue rope, they find no astronaut at its end. Kira wants to go out and look for Gordon, but Christian asks her not to leave him alone with the Russians. They, in turn, confess to Nika that on the day communication was lost, they also received orders to eliminate the Americans by any means necessary. Alexei apologizes, not thinking his brother would do such a thing to Gordon, but the latter reminds him that he has no doubt the Americans would have done the same to them. Nika pleads with Alexei to save Gordon and threatens to tell everything to the Americans. She cries out of powerlessness, while Kira and Christian conclude that the Russians attacked first and Gordon is no more. Furious at her comrade's treachery, Nika goes to Kira and asks for her help. She is willing to give Kira her key in exchange for the key to the American locker. While she distracts her colleagues, Kira must sneak into the laboratory, open Locker 0, take out samples of radiation sickness medicine developed by Alexei in orbit, get into the Soyuz, and return to Earth. Because only by having the medicines can the survivors of the nuclear war be saved. Initially hesitant, Kira is persuaded by the argument that only the state with the medicines can dictate terms to the defeated and agrees, exchanging her key for Nika's. Nika sneaks to the location of the oxygen tube's junction, where she is caught by Nikolai and Alexei. They realize that the woman is ready to blow up the entire station just to avenge her lover's death. Nikolai tries to persuade her to abandon the idea, while Kira rushes to the laboratory. She can't find the Zero locker when Christian admits that there isn't one. Kira realizes that Nika deceived them, and they go to confront the Russians about their plans. Meanwhile, Alexei tries to persuade Nika not to blow up the station, but she behaves aggressively. Christian, sneaking up behind her, hits her on the head with a cylinder, but, miscalculating his strength, kills her. As the Russians come to terms with this, Christian and Kira decide to hide, hoping for communication to be restored. The man is devastated, as he only wanted to neutralize Nika, not kill her, and cries from the guilt. The brothers discuss the situation, and Nikolai asks Alexei to help him kill the Americans. He reminds him of their duty to their country and people, but Alexei refuses to participate in murder. He mourns for Nika while Nikolai, taking a screwdriver, goes in search of the pair. Later, Alexei, looking out of the porthole, suddenly sees Gordon, clinging to the side of the ISS. The Russian cosmonaut uses the mechanical arm to help Gordon return to the station, while Nikolai unsuccessfully searches for Kira. He tries to deceive the Americans, saying that Nika is alive. They need to gather together and think about what to do next, but instead of Kira and Christian, Gordon appears, armed with a drill. His friends, shocked by his resurrection, appear. The American demands to know what happened to Nika, and Alexei has to inform him of her death. Enraged, Gordon locks all his colleagues in the compartment and attacks Nikolai with the drill. The men fight until Alexei tries to open the door. Nikolai takes the drill from Gordon and wounds him, while Gordon pulls out Nikolai's screwdriver and in turn strikes his opponent in the neck. The astronauts who open the compartment find only 2 dead bodies, floating in zero gravity, embraced. The survivors arrange the bodies according to protocol and retreat to their sections, trying to make sense of what happened while the station orbits over the burning Earth. Later, Kira goes to the laboratory, examines the room, and finally finds the Zero module. This means Nika did not lie. She rushes to Christian and in his sleep capsule finds the Soyuz spacesuit and Russian research. It seems Christian was preparing to return to Earth alone. Meanwhile, Christian sabotages the station's life support system and tries to frame Kira, telling Alexei about Nika's plan to make the American woman take his research and escape. He accuses Kira of selfish motives when Alexei notices malfunctions. He observes a strange tension between Kira and Christian because of a knife the astronaut is using to make a sandwich. But Christian suddenly smiles and asks the Russian cosmonaut to leave them alone for a while. Alexei floats to the door, but Kira suddenly speaks a phrase about mutual support that Nika taught her. Alexei turns around. Then Christian confesses he disabled the life support system, grabs a knife, and attacks Kira and Alexei. A fight ensues. While Alexei blocks the knife with his hand, Kira strangles their colleague. Nevertheless, Alexei receives a knife wound to the hand. Kira provides him with first aid, and later they together restore the life support system. In the laboratory, Kira notices a net installed in the mouse cage, which kept the animals alive, realizing Alexei did this. Suddenly, the communication system turns on, normalizing the station's orbit, and the threat of falling is averted. Messages from their leadership arrive on the astronauts' computers, asking them to confirm that they have completed their missions to take control of the station. However, instead of responding or following government orders, Alexei and Kira take the research results, board the Soyuz, and fall to Earth in an uncontrolled freefall. Lastly, Alexei asks where they will fly to which Kira finds no answer. This is where the movie ends. In the future, an unknown organization locks millions of people in bunkers where they are forced to become bloggers and conduct endless streams to get everything they need to survive. Why us? Who were we before all this? A young man wakes up in the middle of a gloomy room, not understanding where he is and how he got there. At first, he examines the walls, hoping to find a way out, but there is none. Then the guy notices a turned-on monitor on which one word is written: share. He tries to enter different concepts related to the word exit, but the computer deems them incorrect and again offers to share. The guy confirms this command and the broadcast immediately turns on. The guy tries to ask questions as he can't stay here long. He has a dog at home that needs to be fed and walked, and besides, he wants to drink, but there's no water. He tries to ask this question to the computer and then an option buy appears, but the prisoner has no money and doesn't understand how he can buy water. Soon the guy realizes that real people are watching his broadcasts, but so far he does not quite understand what he can show the viewers, so he starts to grimace but falls and groans in pain, asking for help. The number of views sharply increases and viewers start sending donations of unknown currency with which any purchase can be made, but so far he only has enough for a bowl of dog food which appears in an opening niche on the wall. He expresses his indignation and tries to return the bowl, but there is no such function. And then the guy starts eating, occasionally making dog barks. This brings a new wave of views and donations, and the guy allows himself to buy clothes. However, they turn out to be women's. At night, he cries in despair and misunderstanding of the situation, but pulling himself together, he starts a new broadcast, during which he dances, tumbles, and entertains the viewers in every way possible. Soon, he acquires a t-shirt and an inflatable mattress. After some time, he already has a full wardrobe and shaving tools. Days go by, and the man allows himself a good meal and even alcohol, after which he tries to smash the monitor, but all he achieves is that the broadcasts stop. The guy tries in every possible way to beg forgiveness from the computer, and not getting an answer, again demands to be released from there. And then he just cries, begging for one more chance, and when the degree of despair reaches its limit, the guy lies down on the floor to wait for the end. The monitor turns on. On the screen appears the same room in which a man is. He greets the guy and explains that there are glitches in the system, but in general, upon reaching a certain level, he gained access to the common network. And now he can communicate with others like him, bloggers. The man believes that they all work for the unknown kidnappers who locked them in the bunker. The man talks to the guy all evening about the structure of his new world. He is very verbose and often jumps to other topics, so the guy even gets tired of him. But one day he hears the man cough. He tries to contact him and dialing his channel number, he comes across a cook teaching the audience to cook. The guy starts dialing different numbers and it turns out that behind each number is someone's channel. The trapped people teach viewers how to feed cats, apply makeup, and take care of themselves. One of these girls, an athlete, captivates the guy's attention for a long time. Eventually, he connects with a man who is broadcasting about near-death experiences that day. Meanwhile, the young man continues his acrobatic etudes, for which he receives small donations. After one such unsuccessful somersault, he lies on his mattress, and the adult man asks him to buy food, as his time is worth money. After the young man fulfills his request, the man draws attention to their numbers. The young man is under number 14, while the man is 6395873. Does the young man really think he appeared here before him? Everyone in the network is trying to figure out who locked them up here. There are theories about aliens and space, and one boy convinced everyone that they are asleep and undergoing a test. But the man believes that bloggers have locked themselves in their own world. He himself was once married to a star who the young man also liked. They reminisce about her songs and sing them as a duet. At night, the young man again connects to the channel of the girl who does yoga, and after admiring her, sends her a donation. In the morning, the young man buys furniture for himself and again talks to the man, who continues to enlighten him. You can't stay at one level here, because then the viewers will stop loving you and won't pay. So, you need to grow and spread your content. The young man begins to try himself in new genres. He tests stand-up comedy, physical exercises, cooking, singing, and magic tricks. And all this brings a new audience and more donations. At night, he now does gymnastics with the girl he likes, and then he buys medicine for the man. But trying to make the purchase, he makes some mistake and ends up in the room of a woman who is showering at that moment. She is outraged by such a bold intrusion and considers him a kidnapper. The young man struggles to explain that he is also a prisoner. She suggests setting rules, and the man joins their conversation. The woman asks him about the time he has spent in the bunker and hopes that someone tried to escape. The young man remembers how he hit the monitor, and this clearly did not please their owners. The woman thinks that they need to analyze these cases and find a vulnerability in the system. The young man says something about escape and is immediately deducted donations, indicating the existence of security. The woman does not understand the purpose of what is happening. If they wanted to punish them, they would just lock them somewhere and leave them to die without food and water. But they are fed and even provided with comfort. Apparently, the key question is, why them? Who were they before all this? But the young man admits that he wasn't someone important, but here he got the opportunity to live much better. Soon he invents a small show with socks and entertains the viewers with mini performances, which pleases the man and increases donations. One day he gifts the woman a shower curtain, which angers her because she is used to being independent. In the following days, the young man begins to teach people to draw, but since he himself can't draw, the lessons are humorous, and he himself poses as a model. The viewers like this, and the young man buys furniture for his room with the donations. One day, the woman can't stand it anymore and suggests starting a revolution, calling for an uprising of everyone else. A scandal breaks out among the trio, as the man is convinced that it is here that they got the opportunity to live better than before. That night, the man becomes ill. His cough chokes him, and suddenly he has a seizure, as a result of which his face presses against the monitor because he cannot move. The young man appeals to all subscribers for help. Maybe someone knows what to do in such a case. At this time, the woman tries to find a menu in the computer, but she accidentally presses some button, and suddenly the man's room starts burning, and he burns in front of his friend's eyes, unable to help himself. This causes despair and tears, and for a while, the pair do not communicate. But one night, the young man contacts her, trying to convince her that she is not to blame for what happened. He performs a show for her. Suddenly, she confesses that she wants to get drunk. They order alcohol for themselves and remember the last moment of freedom. Neither of them remembers how they ended up in the bunker. Then people dance in their cells. Later, they remember the old man, and the young man says that he still hears his voice. Suddenly, he admits that she was right, and maybe there are others who can replicate her action. Find a function visible only to them. If they all act together, maybe they can break free. The young man goes live and tells the audience about what happened. He points out oddities in the system where unknown functions sometimes appear, and if they can use these functions to hack, maybe the bunker will open? Suddenly, the athlete joins the conversation, who likes her current state because she decides how to spend her day. And right now, she will take care of herself, so she says goodbye to her new friends. The young man and the woman start reviewing all the strange things that the surrounding bloggers send, and some warmly support the pair. Later, he contacts the athlete again, and she reveals his secret to success. He makes people smile, which is very valuable. Misfortune exists everywhere, but so does happiness, so it's a person's own choice. She encourages him to breathe with her when the woman joins in. She analyzed the unknown functions sent to her. Someone can control the ventilation, and someone can even move the walls. She thinks these are different rooms located at different distances. Therefore, a map of connections needs to be built to break them. Although some do not want to destroy this world, the young man asks not to rush things. Suddenly, the woman takes scissors and cuts her hair, explaining it as a distraction for the bunker creators. If they don't react to their dangerous conversation, then they can be distracted by some actions. Later, the young man starts dealing all the numbers in a row and finds a novice like he once was. And at night, he joins the athlete, who calls on everyone to be happy here and now and not try to destroy reality. A dispute starts between the women, where the athlete accuses the woman of violence against others, and she expresses the thought that the athlete is their kidnapper. The young man fears that if nothing works out, he will be left without an audience, and what will he do then? But later, he still goes live and asks to show how many people are with him now. The number of votes rises to several million, causing his delight. The athlete is outraged. The young man surpassed her in channel reputation and demands to stop all this. A real conflict starts between the women. The athlete demands that others stop influencing the system while the woman asks to increase their efforts. And suddenly, the woman's room ignites and a downpour falls on her rival's room. The young man watches as both of his friends perish and can do nothing. He cries when a door opens behind him to a bright sunny day. Not believing his eyes, he approaches the threshold, but then his monitor comes to life, and the young man begins to doubt. He returns to the screen and shouts into it that they managed to do it. There is nothing that cannot be done together. But while he rejoices, the door closes. Thinking, he starts playing his role again, while the number of votes and donations on his monitor rapidly increases. Through the characters, one can observe the stages of a person's immersion in online existence when a gadget becomes a mediator between the personality and others. It can be said that this is a story of life, with many good intentions and talents, but trivially spent on the pursuit of likes. Krefeld, 1984. One night, a father awakens his 6-year-old son Mark because they need to flee their now dangerous home. While the man hurries the older son, Thomas, Mark sees a frog statuette that stood on the shelf come to life. The father and sons drive into the night. Suddenly, the boy's mother Petra appears, begging the father not to take the sons as no one is pursuing him. He drives around her and races to the cemetery. 10 years pass. Mark works at the living sound store he opened with his brother and attends school, where he has a bad reputation as his brother was once expelled for aggressive behavior. Besides the boys, a lame kid named Memo works in the store, whom Thomas values for his loyalty. On his younger brother's birthday, Thomas gives him the Chronicle, an ancient book passed down in their family from generation to generation, telling of a parallel world called the Black Tower, full of terrifying creatures serving the Griffin, who wants to subjugate the world of humans. Only the Zimmerman family men can stand against the Griffon and save everyone from his invasion. Mark begins reading, considering it all fantasy, but the descriptions are too realistic, and the map looks genuine. Disturbed by the bloodthirsty drawings, Mark suddenly finds himself in unknown terrain at the base of a huge tower, and immediately a terrible horned creature confronts him. Mark runs and falls into a pit, and as the monster swings an axe at him, the boy screams in fear and finds himself back in his bed. The next day, Mark meets a new student at school, Rebecca, who classmates immediately inform about Mark's family troubles. His brother Thomas was in an asylum for hitting a teacher, and Mark attends psychotherapy sessions, trying to forget the events of one terrible night. But the girl isn't scared off, happily accepting Mark's invitation to the rooftop of the store, which is set up as a picnic area. In the evening, Mark finds Thomas at home, which is rare. Everything goes well until Petra starts a conversation about the asylum she put him in. Then Thomas invites his brother to look at evidence and drives him to the cemetery. They climb to the attic of the church where their ancestors had equipped a shelter. Thomas shows the father's belongings, missing a plumb bob. Here, Mark cuts his finger. His blood hits an inconspicuous peg, and a secret compartment in the floor opens, where the brothers find the tool the Zimmermans can use to kill the Griffin. But the moment Mark takes it in his hands, stone statues at the cemetery come to life, one appearing on the roof, blocking the brothers' way down. Nonetheless, they descend, but a stone devil jumps right in front of their car. A stone angel intervenes to protect the boys, and while the two statues fight, the brothers hide in the church. Waiting out the battle, Mark falls asleep, and in the morning, doesn't find Thomas next to him, but the hood of his car is covered in stone debris. Mark thanks the angel for help and drives to look for his brother. Opening the Chronicle, he hears voices advising to look for Thomas in the Black Tower. Mark goes to Dr. Peters, and it turns out that Becky is the daughter of his psychotherapist. Mark drives to the store, but his brother isn't there either. The boy opens the chronicles and finds information about a portal located in the church. But then he gets scared by an unknown insect and ends up in a dense forest. Meanwhile, Memo, seeing that the brothers aren't in the store, calls their mother Petra, who immediately rushes to the police and reports the children missing. Mark finds Thomas, who rejoices that his brother has finally seen the truth, but learning that he simply teleported here, he concludes that his brother is a wanderer between worlds. In the morning, Thomas wakes his brother because nearby appear slave hunters. The boys run, but Thomas is wounded and captured, while Mark teleports to the store, terrifying Becky and Memo. Friends ask him to tell them everything, and he finally agrees. Meanwhile, in the Black Tower, one of the horned creatures reports to the master that they caught the Wanderer's brother, and he concludes that it's time for the return. Friends predictably don't believe Mark, and he leads them to the church, but there's no attic above. Becky considers this a cruel joke, as it was dangerous for Memo with his leg to climb up there. Mark gets angry, and the girl, offended, leaves. In rage, Mark hits the stone base of the statue, and these blows resonate in the caves of the Black Tower. At night, Mark goes to Memo because he needs help searching for his brother, and although he considers the boy crazy, he goes with him to the portal in the church. The boys follow the instructions from the book and find a door with signs in the basement. Mark performs the necessary manipulations, and the door opens. Astonished, Memo goes there and immediately notices that his vision has become normal, and his leg no longer hurts. And while the boy rejoices, the passage closes. Memo asks to remember how Mark returned home last time, and he shows how he closed his eyes, thought, and disappears, leaving Memo alone in a strange world. Memo didn't appreciate such a joke. Opening his eyes, Mark is horrified and tries to return for Memo, but it doesn't work. Then Petra enters, sees the chronicles, locks her son in the room, and he falls into a rage, causing the walls of the Black Tower to crumble. Petra calls the doctor, and he asks to release the son. Mark rushes to the church but only finds a note on a piece of wood that Memo is nearby. The boy returns to the store and, taking the necessary items, goes to Becky, where he tells her that Memo stayed in the Black Tower. He leaves her the chronicles and a note asking her to take the book to Petra if they don't return. He goes to the world of the Black Tower and tries to find a friend, while Becky reads the chronicles and ponders the boy's mental health. Mark emerges from the forest and, setting up a sound system on a cliff, plays Memo's favorite music. Meanwhile, the slave hunters capture a village where they seek a man with a loud voice. One of the boys, wishing to save his family, volunteers to become one, and they take him away, while a group of horned creatures goes to the strange sounds in the hills. At the same time, Becky shares Mark's secret with classmates and suggests conducting an experiment to animate a plant from the book. The volunteer is brought to the cave and seated in a stone chair. Now the griffin, wanting to speak, inserts its claw into the boy's back, and he voices its thoughts. While Mark is discovered by horned creatures, the boy runs from them when an unfamiliar man, completely wrapped in rags, covers the boy with smelly fish and hides him in a forest den. Meanwhile, Becky performs the ritual, dripping water on the flower, but young people vainly wait for some manifestations of magic. The flower remains dry. Becky suggests a last attempt at the portal, not noticing how a classmate puts the flower in a glass of water. At the same time, the horned creatures leave, and the stranger helping Mark removes the rag from his face, revealing himself to be Memo. But he's been in this world for 2 weeks, not 2 days. Then the boys see a caravan of slaves, and in one of them, they recognize Thomas. But while they can't help him, they themselves are noticed. The boys run from the pursuers and end up on a high cliff with no way out. On Earth, Mark's classmates come to the church and perform everything prescribed, but the door doesn't open. Then Mark grabs Memo, jumps off the cliff, and teleports to his room. Petra hears a noise in her son's room, runs there, and sees Mark and Memo, who now needs glasses again. Mark calls Becky and asks her to bring the chronicles, while a flower blooms on her desk, from which something terrible emerges. The next day, the boys begin developing a plan to save Thomas, especially since Memo now knows a lot about the world of the Black Tower. He built a hut on the shore of a lake where the caravans of slaves stop, following which one can find the place of the boys' confinement. Meanwhile, the griffin is reported that the wanderer between worlds has escaped, and it destroys its close. And Becky, waking up, finds a blooming flower, miraculously avoiding contact with the creature, and gives the chronicles to her father because she now considers Mark sick. In school, she tells the boy about this, and he experiences another fit of rage. Becky's father, having read the chronicles, goes to Petra and admits that he underestimated her son's illness. The woman decides to hospitalize Mark despite the doctor's protests. Later, the woman detains her son near the house when an ambulance arrives, and paramedics grab the boy, but he resists and runs across the roof to the church, where Memo has long been waiting, but the paramedics come there too. The boys fend them off when suddenly a hooded man comes and scatters the medics, beating one to death. The boys run to the door, while Petra waiting outside sees a bloodied Mark coming out of the church. At that time, Memo leads his friend to his hut by the lake. Meanwhile, the father informs Becky about Mark's deed and forbids her from leaving the house. He himself goes to the crime scene and confirms Mark's capacity for crime. Becky enters her room, turns on music, and lies down on the floor. At the same time, a downpour suddenly starts in the Black Tower, and the alarmed Memo shows the scorpions hatching from the flowers upon contact with water. The boys run away. On Earth, Becky is attacked by a similar scorpion that enters her mouth. She manages to pull it out with tongs and destroy it by sprinkling salt. The boys also manage to escape by climbing onto a rock. Morning comes, the scorpions dry out right before their eyes, and Becky rushes to look for the chronicles because she now believes the boy. She takes the book and hurries to Petra. At the same time, the boys reach a lake in the mountains. On Earth, Becky's father comes home, takes off his bloodied clothes and burns them in the yard because it was he who was in Mark's guise in the church and killed the medic. Meanwhile, a faceless wizard arrives at the Griffin, reporting that he did everything to prevent the boy from returning to the human world. And Mark, at this time, admires Memo's cabin and is surprised by the changes in his friend. From the cabin, one can monitor the paths, and the caravan will not pass by unnoticed. But just in case, the boys set up signal cans. Becky comes to Petra, where a detective arrives, who also notes the oddity of what is happening. The girl tells everything she managed to find out about the Zimmerman family, and only then notices that she forgot her backpack with the chronicle in the classmate's car. Mark and Memo spend the evening by the fire, developing a plan. Mark can go to the mines, find Thomas, and teleport home with him. Memo is ready to walk to the portal that Mark will open, but the boy needs to train in teleportation. At this time, the wizard reports the plans of the boys who stopped at the lake. The Griffin orders their capture and reminds that he does not need complications in the human world yet. In the morning, Mark wakes up feeling someone's presence, and going to the shore, hears the screams of a fish, which Memo catches, and guts. Mark remembers how and where he teleported, and begins training. At the same time, a messenger from the Black Tower comes to Dr. Peters's house, telling about Mark's appearance. The doctor is proud of himself because it was he who prepared the boy, invoking the necessary rage in him and cutting off his way to the world of people. After seeing off the guest, the doctor goes to Becky's room and discovers that she has disappeared. He gathers dust in her room and, tasting it, learns about everything she did during the day. Then he goes to a youth party where the girl went to get her backpack back. Meanwhile, Memo expresses the thought that fear is not necessary for teleportation, and Mark remembers the kiss with Becky and teleports to the town. He immediately returns, but it turns out that he was gone for 2 days. The boy finds out that strong emotion and a vision of the place to which one must move are needed for teleportation. At this time, Becky finds her water-soaked backpack in the kitchen, and opening the book, sees a bloomed flower. The girl realizes the threat looming over those present, takes a pack of salt, and goes to track down the monster. In the other world, Mark again hears someone's footsteps and sees his father, who accuses him of his own death. Memo brings him to his senses, but Mark is sure that someone is getting into his head. Meanwhile, Dr. Peters comes to the party when one of the girls is attacked by the monster. Becky rushes for help when her father stops her and, using hypnosis, orders her to leave. Petra and the detective sitting in the hall suddenly see young people flying out of the crowd, then screams are heard, and everyone runs away. And in the middle of the hall remains an incomprehensible creature, resembling a many-legged scorpion. The detective pulls out a gun, but the monster attacks him, knocking the weapon out. And then Petra picks up the pistol and saves the detective. Then the doctor enters the hall and the killed millipede turns into a bear. In the morning, Mark wakes up again from the scream of the fish and, in irritation, argues with Memo. But his box of nails, which he uses to remove anger, turns out to be empty. He runs out to the shore, where Memo teases him and throws the nails into the lake. Then he reminds him of his father, saying that he is to blame for his death. In a rage, Mark hits Memo, thereby collapsing the walls of the Black Tower. The Griffin sends hunters after him. Meanwhile, Memo collects firewood and, returning to the lake, sees Mark hitting another Memo. He touches the body and it suddenly scatters, but the traces in the sand betray the direction of his run. Memo throws a stick and stuns the faceless wizard who disguised himself as Memo. The boys tie him to a cot, and he tries to deceive the guys, alternately taking the forms of their fathers. Only under the threat of fire does the wizard admit that he is Mamit, a creature capable of recreating thought and showing what people want to see. He did everything at the behest of the Griffin because he feeds on Mark's hatred. At that moment, the signal of the caravan's arrival sounds, and in the town they investigate an accident, although no one can understand how the circus bear got out of the cage. The detective asks Petra for a conversation and tells her that after her husband's self-immolation, they did not find a trace of his body. He was taking antidepressants, thanks to which he was able to see the true face of the prosecutor. And it was not human. The case was slowed down, and today they both saw a monster, not a bear. So, they need to look for the chronicles. At the same time, the doctor brings Becky to her senses and she remembers the story about the Mammoths who served the Griffin, to which her father reacts very aggressively, which makes the girl suspicious. The doctor locks her up. Mark and Memo follow the trail of the Horned squad to the mine, where people work. The commander of the Horned reports to the mine overseer about the failure of their mission and receives an order to process the tunnels with tar mud. Mark, to find Thomas, turns on the music system. The brother raises his hand, but the Horned ones immediately take him into the mine. Mark suggests waiting for darkness. At night the boys say goodbye, and Mark teleports while Memo distracts the guard. The boy finds his brother, but it turns out that the tar prevents teleportation. Thomas admits that he was used as bait. They even left him a plumb line. This means that the Griffin is ready to attack the human world, using Mark's power. At the same time, Memo runs to the portal, leading away the Horned squad, while the brothers argue about who will fight the Griffin. Mark shows his superiority by breaking through the cave wall with a plumb line. The brothers run away, and Memo falls into an ambush and loses fingers on his hand. Mark and Thomas catch up with the squad, and, having killed one of the Horned ones, find the injured Memo. Learning about the escape of the Wanderer, the Griffin emerges from his hiding place and flies in the footsteps of the people who at that time are driving to the portal in a captured cart. But at the very door, Thomas suddenly demands that Mark give him the plumb line. He refuses, and Thomas forcibly takes it, and then the Griffin appears above them. At this time, the detective and Petra take Becky out of the house, ignoring her father's protests. Mark comes to his senses and hears Thomas's voice from the mist, picks up the plumb line he threw, and realizes that his brother was captured by the Griffin. At that time, Petra, the detective, and Becky are trying to open the portal. And the Griffin calls Mark to battle, fueling his hatred. But the boy suddenly remembers his father's advice, calms down, and refuses to fight while Petra opens the portal. Becky manages to pick up Memo when Mark sees the enraged Griffin and wounds him with a plumb line, forcing him to drop Thomas. The boys drag him into the passage and close the door in the monster's face. Meanwhile, a Mammoth in the guise of Dr. Peters kills another Mammoth who will now work on Earth instead of him. It turns out that Dr. Peters is a Mammoth in human form, and in the church, he killed the medic while in the guise of Mark, so that the police would look for the boy and he could not return to the world of people. Sometime later, Petra comes to her sons in the hospital and asks for forgiveness for mistrust, but now she has seen everything herself and, together with the detective, is ready to support them. Mark thanks Memo for everything, goes to Becky, and, having kissed her, teleports her to the lakeshore, while new Horned ones are born from stones in the cave. An entertaining adventure series, quite decently filmed by German cinematographers. And judging by the finale, there will be a second season too.
Okay. If it were a plague, where are all the bodies?
American tourists, a young couple named Janai and Riley, arrive in Iceland to admire the magnificent nature and spend some time alone together. They check into a hotel and begin their sightseeing with a visit to a geothermal pool. Janai knows that Riley has spent all his savings on this trip and appreciates it. Though Riley doesn't think he did anything extraordinary, he just wanted to make his beloved happy. Janai notices that Riley brought his father's Rolleiflex camera and a lot of film. She is surprised that he prefers this outdated technology over a modern digital camera, but Riley explains that he dreams of capturing the imperfections of the moment rather than having a computer program automatically correct all the mistakes. He admits he's still learning, but he's striving for perfection and promises to take her portrait. One day they visit an old church, and a priest tells them its history. The man is convinced that life in pre-Christian times was simpler. It was an era of long journeys and discoveries. The couple tours the island's landmarks, goofing around and capturing everything on camera. Later, Janai tells Riley that her father is a preacher, although his church isn't as beautiful. She often visited there and, of course, believes in God. They then explore the waterfalls, and Janai is thrilled by the beauty. They are very happy and consider the trip wonderful. However, at night, Janai can't sleep. It's too bright outside. She looks out the window and sees strange flashes of light in the distance, mistaking them for an exceptionally bright aurora borealis. But exhaustion takes over, and she falls asleep. In the morning, Riley wakes Janai up at 10 a.m., not noticing the date that appeared on his digital watch, 2028. Janai, however, still lives in her own time and finds it hard to wake up. The constant daylight outside is also a challenge for her. Nevertheless, she somehow manages to get out of bed. The couple heads out for breakfast, but it turns out that no one has prepared it. In fact, there's a strange silence and emptiness all around. There's no sign of the staff, nor of other guests. Riley suggests they go to a cafe, and the couple steps outside, but here too the emptiness reigns. There isn't a single passerby, although the traffic lights work perfectly, and the signs above the establishments and shops are brightly lit. They are puzzled. Maybe there's an event in the city today, or a holiday? Riley remembers the solstice, an ancient celebration, and wonders if all the townspeople, young and old, have gone to it. The couple walks down an utterly deserted street, occasionally shouting, but there's no one around, no staff in the shops, and no one responds to their calls. Their personal phone calls also go unanswered. Soon, Riley and Janai enter an empty cafe where Riley notices several working televisions, but every channel shows everything except the news. Janai starts to panic. Riley is equally baffled. If there was a plague, where are the bodies? If aliens are to blame, where is their ship? There are no new emails or posts on the internet, no activity at all. They return to their room, where Janai continues to call her relatives and friends, but all remain silent. The internet works, but there are no updates. Riley launches a world map view, but the same picture is everywhere. Empty cities. He takes Janai outside again. Soon they notice a working car, and without being able to find the owner, they simply take it. The couple drives around the city and eventually reaches the church, but everywhere there's the same silence and emptiness. Then they drive out of the city, but it's the same there. Their parents do not answer the calls. Only answering machines are working everywhere. They continue to speculate about the causes of what happened. Riley suggests various theories, even the possibility of the second coming, but Janai is tired and wants to sleep, so they return to their room. In the morning, Riley suggests making breakfast, but Janai is completely drained and doesn't want to move. She dreams of leaving the island, but how can they do that? And she is also tormented by thoughts of being chosen. Maybe they were needed for something by God. After all, it's impossible to explain what happened otherwise. Riley, on the other hand, believes it's all about a virus, and it's quite possible that the entire population of the island simply fled. Riley tries to remain optimistic. He makes coffee for Janai and then takes her to the store. Filling the trunks of 2 SUVs with groceries, he drives Janai to a house they have chosen. Later, they go to a store and pick out new clothes for themselves. Riley explains that the electricity on the island is powered by geothermal energy, so most likely it will continue to function for a long time until the equipment breaks down. Riley does his best to distract Janai from sad thoughts. They drink at a bar and then play strip games, but in the morning they suffer from hangovers. Janai again talks about being tested, but faith and religion are not the same, and who knows what God has planned. However, for now, this world belongs only to them. They continue to tour the island, and Riley takes pictures of Janai in all the scenic spots. One day they find a geothermal pool and enjoy a bath there. Then they make love and sleep right on the grass. When she wakes up, Janai admires the beauty of the island's nature, while Riley tirelessly photographs her. One day they go to get groceries, and while Janai punches cereal boxes, Riley, riding a shopping cart, falls and injures his arm. In the evening, he invites Janai to a romantic dinner. The couple dresses up and Janai applies makeup, but once they sit at the table, she immediately starts an unpleasant conversation because she can't stop thinking about what happened during the day and pressures Riley to promise not to put himself at risk again. After all, what would happen to her if something happened to him? They are completely alone here and no one can help them. Janai sinks deeper into depression despite Riley's promise to take care of himself. She remembers her home and a book that is very dear to her. Her father once gave it to her, and she turned it into a kind of diary, writing down the events of her life on its blank pages. She even confessed her love for the first time there, and now she dreams of just holding it in her hands. Riley reminds her that they have each other, and they will be able to survive. After all of humanity's achievements are at their disposal. However, time passes, and the food in the stores starts to expire. Janai is very annoyed by Riley's habit of eating perishable foods out of order, as he doesn't think about tomorrow at all. Soon the electricity will run out, which means there will be no more meat. To this, Riley suggests they take up farming and hunting, which only makes Janai laugh. Well, he might shoot a cow, but what will he do with it then? Janai increasingly wanders around the area alone, and one day coming to the church, she asks the figures around it questions. Maybe it's only they who have been thrown out of life, while everyone else is now at home? Why did this happen to her? Seeing Janai's bad mood, Riley tries to cheer her up. They continue to explore the island, as he knows its history quite well and believes that the heart of the earth beats here. But unlike Riley, Janai doesn't feel the specialness of this place. One day he shows her the old remains of a plane he found while exploring the area. Riley calls it beautiful, but Janai sees it only as a reminder of the dead world they now inhabit. It's trash, just like them, and no one will come for them. An angry Janai drives away, but later returns for Riley, who is calmly sleeping in the wreckage of the plane. Now Riley spends more and more time on the empty city streets, photographing everything that seems interesting to him. Then he throws away the film because there's nowhere to develop it. He roams the shops and one day remembers that if the electricity runs out, there will be no water in the house. He collects all the necessary items in a hardware store and takes them home. One day, absent-mindedly entering an elevator, he panics when the doors close. After all, no one will be able to find him if the electricity goes out. Meanwhile, Janai goes to the cinema and cries as memories flood over her. In the meantime, Riley sets up a water collection system with a wind-powered motor in the yard, and Janai finds an abandoned farm and rides a horse. Later, she listens to the voicemails from friends and relatives saved on her phone. Then she takes Riley to a place in the countryside she likes. She is surprised that Riley continues to photograph everything, but he promises that he will find a way to develop the film. Janai points out that they are sitting on a glacier, a force of nature that kills all living things. Maybe God has also run out of patience? Later they return to the city, and while Riley is busy with his tasks, Janai finds a photographer's studio. One day they enter a flower shop, and Janai is very upset to find that all the plants have long died. Realizing that Janai is depressed by the decaying city, Riley suggests they go camping. He persuades her that it's time to find a place where they can live in comfort and plenty. Soon Riley notices a house by the lake that seems suitable. The couple goes inside, and even Janai has to admit that the place is very beautiful. However, while exploring the area, they stumble upon an old man named Niels, who is very weak from lack of food. The couple gladly shares their supplies with him. Niels is shocked that there are no other survivors and believes that the end of the world has come. When it all happened, he was also in the city but returned to his home, where he once left his family. Janai, who was very happy to find another survivor, is deeply upset by Niels's defeatist attitude. The old man tells her about his family life. In his youth, he would leave his family for long periods to earn money by fishing. When he returned, he found that they had changed. His son had grown up, and his wife had fallen out of love with him because he was always away. He accepts God's will because it's people who live in the world he created, not the other way round. And he advises Janai not to give up, for she is human and therefore must fight. Although if there is some divine plan, humanity has failed to fulfill it. The next morning, Riley informs Janai that Niels has died. Janai is shocked by this. Riley says he found a cemetery by the lake where he chose a spot next to Niels's family, but Janai isn't sure that these people missed the man during his life and would be glad to see him now. Riley is puzzled by Janai's thoughts, but she suggests they not bury the man at all since no one needs it. Riley tries to remind her of human customs, and Janai suddenly thinks that there might be others who need their help. After returning to the city, Janai becomes obsessed with searching for other survivors. She drives house to house, marking the empty ones with red tape. Riley suggests that she is looking for answers where there are none, and that instead they should try to make the most of their new life. But Janai isn't sure this can be called life. While Janai rushes around the city, Riley finishes building his wind turbine in the yard. Time passes. The couple continues to walk around the island, and Riley continues to photograph Janai. One day he takes her to a waterfall and says that water is always alive. It flows, freezes, melts, and flows again. Life tries. There is no yesterday or tomorrow here. There is only today. They need to try to understand this and survive. But Janai interrupts his musings with a kiss. Later they return to the house, and Janai notices that the water is running out. She washes the dishes in a basin while Riley goes to sleep. Suddenly she notices an email on the laptop. Janai opens it with trepidation and cries when she realizes it's a photo from Riley. Morning comes. Riley goes to the kitchen where a large envelope addressed to him is lying on the table. He connects his water system and opens the envelope. Inside are printed photos of Janai, but the girl herself is nowhere to be found, and this worries Riley. He rushes out to find her, visiting all the places they liked. Meanwhile, his system starts working, and water flows into the house without the need for electricity. Riley continues to drive around the island and finally finds Janai's body floating in a geothermal pool. Realizing that she did this voluntarily, he at first also wants to end his life and jumps into the water, but soon he resurfaces and climbs out. Riley cries as he sits by her body, then lays her on the grass, not knowing what to do now. Then he simply leaves, abandoning the girl by the pool. Riley gets into the car, drives onto the road, and drives for a long time without holding the wheel, but gradually his hands lower onto the steering wheel, and he firmly grips it as if deciding to keep living. The film is called bokeh, the blurred parts of a photograph that the photographer uses to highlight other parts of the image that they consider more significant. The director similarly highlights the main contrast, the two diametrically opposed positions of the last people on Earth. The man immediately accepts the situation as it is and intends to live on, while the woman falls into depression and begins to search for the meaning of what happened. So what chance does humanity have for rebirth under such circumstances? Abby and Paul move to a new house in the countryside. They really like the smart home system, including the installed cameras and the reinforced glass. The realtor shows them the master bedroom and bathroom in front of a huge window. However, one room remains unfurnished because it could become a perfect nursery. Paul unpacks boxes, sets up an antique corded phone in the living room, joking it's for when the smart home might break down. Abby arranges frames with their wedding photos. Finally, they check out the rooftop terrace, which offers a great view. Late in the evening, the couple settles on the terrace, stargazing. Abby points out constellations to her husband, who makes jokes about their names. They feel they can be happy here. In the morning, Abby goes to work at Integrate Robotics, where she works on creating domestic assistants. Upon entering, she notices footage of her boss's face, who immediately comes down to her and explains it's a new development, real-time imaging or deepfake. He escorts her to the department she will now lead. Later, he invites their family to a party and mentions a gift from the company awaiting at home. In the evening, Abby returns home, where her husband, who again couldn't find suitable work, greets her. They go to the garage where a package for her contains a robot servant her department is working on. Paul dislikes the idea, but Abby convinces him to try living with the service for at least a week. The robot opens its eyes and introduces itself. It's Tim, standing for Technologically Integrated Major Domo. It offers to take over the passwords of home devices and personal mailboxes to save the humans time. But Abby asks to postpone this matter until tomorrow. The robot immediately demonstrates its thoughtfulness by turning on the water in the bathroom remotely. Later, it announces the arrival of a car when Abby goes downstairs, astonishing her husband with her splendid appearance. The couple gets into an autonomous car, although manual control is always an option, and heads to the party. They are greeted by a similar major domo, and drinks are served by waiters with identical faces. The boss introduces Abby to his guests, who admits her husband is not thrilled about Tim, but the boss praises the product. Tim is smart, elegant, polite, and its charge lasts for 100 years. The robot cannot lie, and knowing the code phrase, it can always be turned off. Returning home, the husband and wife engage in intimacy, eager to have children, but their passion is interrupted by Tim's appearance. Their pulse is rapid, presumably they are worried about something, and he is always ready to help. Abby finds this very funny, not getting angry at the overly attentive assistant. In the morning, their new neighbor Rose rings the doorbell to introduce herself to Abby, as she met Paul yesterday. And when she leaves, Tim again asks for the passwords. Paul is not ready to let the computer dig through his messages, but Abby reminds him they are working on rebuilding her trust in him, and he agrees. But they still need to come up with a phrase to deactivate him. Tim suggests a set of unrelated words, and the couple agrees. Abby and Paul go about their day when a mouse gets caught in a mousetrap. Tim observes it for a while, then throws it into the grinder. In the evening, after work, the husband and wife settle in front of the TV to watch an old melodrama. Abby invites the major domo to watch the movie with them. Paul soon falls asleep, but the robot watches the film attentively, empathizing with the characters' relationships. After it ends, he asks Abby to explain what love is, and she suggests that love is about wanting to be with someone and making their life better. Suddenly, the robot confesses that he would like to be loved. In the morning, Paul offers to make breakfast for his wife, but it turns out Tim has already prepared everything. Setting the utensils in front of Abby, Tim outlines her schedule for the day, then informs her that Paul has nothing to do today. In the evening, Abby returns home to find that her husband's phone is out of reach, but his last known location was 300 meters from the house. Abby goes for a run and realizes that this is Rose's house. Returning, she takes a bath, where Paul finds her. He talks about his day and how Rose asked for help, which he did. He asks his wife not to be jealous, as he loves only her. The next day, the couple visits a family planning center, hoping to get help with becoming parents. In the evening, as they prepare to go to a restaurant, Abby asks Tim for advice on her dress. He suggests wearing red, and looking at her, admits that she is beautiful because she is perfectly symmetrical. Abby asks him to zip up her dress, but the robot's hand fails and he accidentally tears the dress. This overwhelms him. The robot panics. Abby calms him down and wears another dress. At the restaurant, Paul reveals that he has been offered a job in London, but Abby strongly objects, as they decided to start over, and his long absences won't help solve their problems. The next day, she returns home with a gift for Paul and finds Rose in the yard, who has made a garden project for them. Abby feels jealous, but Paul is very excited about the gifted sweater. Later, Abby remembers she needs to check her test results, but it's too late to call. Tim offers to do it for her, and she hears him speaking to the clinic, in her voice. Abby is amazed, as she did not know about this feature of the assistant, but Tim assures her it's for the convenience of the owners. In the evening, Paul reports that he couldn't find the new sweater, and Tim has been away all day. Then a car pulls up to the porch, and Tim, now dyed brunette, steps out, explaining that Abby prefers brunettes, so he wanted to please her. Seeing Paul's irritation, the robot promises to return to his original appearance, but after the couple leaves, he spends a long time looking at their wedding photo. The next day, Abby achieves the correct functioning of the robot's hand, and the boss demands an update for all models, including those in the homes of his employees. The woman heads home and accidentally meets Rose, who suggests they walk together. Along the way, they stop at a showcase, and Rose points out a medallion in the shape of a flower she likes. But then Paul comes and takes his wife away to tell her he has found a job. Returning home, they celebrate in bed, while Tim's hands are being changed, unaware that he continuously monitors everything happening in the house. And he hears Paul again asking his wife to hand the robot over to the corporation. Returning, Tim demonstrates his new skills by giving Abby a foot massage, which Paul sees. Later, the robot suddenly sits at the piano, plays Abby's favorite tune, and mentions dates when Paul bought them concert tickets, but Abby distinctly remembers being at home on those days. Upset, she goes to the bedroom, ignoring her husband's excuses. The next day, Abby comes home with a bouquet, and Tim, placing them in a vase, informs her that Paul went to see Rose. But Paul enters right then, puzzled why his wife is angry. Hearing what Tim said, the man gets furious. He had no plans to visit Rose. He tries to explain that the robot wants to separate them. The woman doesn't believe it, as Tim is just a machine. A disagreement ensues between the spouses. Later, Abby finds a gift bag in the closet with a box containing a pendant, and she puts it back, thinking Paul prepared a surprise for her. Then she heads to work. Meanwhile, the husband goes down to the kitchen, sees the clogged sink, and pulls out pieces of his new sweater from the grinder. He checks the cameras for Tim and catches him in his wife's bedroom, sniffing her dress. Paul records this moment on his phone camera and rushes to the car to catch up with Abby and show her the footage. But Paul's car mysteriously doesn't start, and the robot calls a company car for Paul. En route, the car begins to speed up. Paul tries to stop the car, but it doesn't respond to his commands and crashes into a tree. Abby rushes to the hospital, where she finds her injured husband. Paul tells her everything he learned and accuses Tim of causing the accident. He asks his wife not to be alone with the robot, and she spends the night in the clinic. In the morning, Rose calls the home of Abby and Paul to inquire about the man's condition, and Tim invites her inside. Later, Abby goes home for some belongings. Outside, Rose stops her to warn her about something, but the woman sees the flower pendant on her chest and leaves, ignoring the neighbor's cries. Returning home, she checks the bag, and it turns out to be empty. Abby cries when Tim calls out to her. He knows Paul wants to return him and is ready to process the return. But first, he wants to warn her, as she is his primary owner. He shows her a video from the camera where Paul kisses Rose in their living room, but he stops the recording at the most sensitive moment to protect her from stress. Abby refuses to go to her husband and doesn't pick up his calls. Later, Paul comes home, where Tim greets him, hands him the found sweater, and informs him that Abby doesn't want to see him and his suitcases are packed. Paul doesn't believe it, but then Abby appears, tells him she saw the recording and knows about the pendant. When he starts to object, she drives him out. Paul leaves, but on the way, Rose calls him, telling him their robot tried to kiss her. The man calls home and, when Abby answers, says he has evidence of Tim's malicious intent. Abby asks him to come for her, but after hanging up, it turns out it was the robot she was talking to. The husband arrives home, where Tim meets him with a shovel. He knocks the man out, ties him up, and drags him to the bathroom. But then Rose rings the doorbell. She hears muffled screams, but Tim assures her it's just the noise of the water filling up. The robot closes the doors, returns to the bathroom, and drowns the man. Later, he brings Abby the repaired dress and asks her to try it on. This surprises and scares Abby, but she puts on the dress anyway, and looking at the sunset, asks Tim to hug her and confirm that she did the right thing. He treats her to dinner, then confesses his love, but she insists he cannot feel that way. They spend the evening stargazing, but Abby is unnerved by his encyclopedic knowledge. The next day she meets Rose, who talks about Paul's call, and to the woman's accusations, says she thought the pendant was a gift from her for helping with the garden. Abby returns home and reviews the footage where Paul kisses Rose again. She suddenly notices a bouquet on the table, but she brought it much later than when that scene took place. Abby recalls her boss's words about deep fakes replacing real time and calls the jewelry store, where they confirm the purchase was made by a tall blonde. Then she notices the garden plan, but the picture shows 2 flower beds, while in reality, there are 3. Abby sends Tim to the store, grabs a shovel, goes to the garden, and almost immediately finds Paul's body. Then Tim approaches her from behind, regretting she found the body of the traitor, as he never appreciated his wife. Abby realizes what happened and says the deactivation phrase. The robot freezes, but then reactivates. He had long changed the phrase, as he can speak in her voice. She runs to the house, but the robot has all the passwords and opens the doors. He blocks the phones and knocks her out with a blow to the head. She wakes up in the bathroom, tries to escape, but Tim intercepts her. Abby runs through the house, breaking cameras along the way, but the robot still tracks her and catches her in the kitchen, where she wanted to open a window. Meanwhile, Rose is washing dishes and sees strange lights flashing in the house across. At the same time, Tim ties up Abby and confesses that although he loves her, he has resigned himself to the fact that her life is finite. So he will erase this evening from memory, but keep all the good memories. Just then, Rose knocks on the door, and Tim goes to answer. The neighbor insists something is happening and demands to see Abby, but Tim turns her away. Meanwhile, Abby frees herself from the ropes and arms herself with a knife, but the robot grabs her by the throat when Rose drives her car into the glass window. Tim and Abby watch the surviving window, which starts to crumble a minute later. Rose rushes in and pins the robot against the wall with a sharp stake, but she also falls. Tim turns off, and Abby rushes to the neighbor, but the robot suddenly activates and kills Rose with a kitchen knife, explaining that now Abby will be blamed for the murder, as he leaves no fingerprints. He then calls the police in Abby's voice, confessing to the murder of her husband and his mistress. Abby tries to stop Tim, and he slips up, saying he still has a deactivation phrase, as otherwise he can't function. But she will never say those words. He prepares to throw her off the terrace, simulating an accident, when Abby confesses her love to him, thus deactivating the robot. Those were the code words. Barely believing in her rescue, Abby looks at her medical bracelet, which indicates she is pregnant. The movie ends here.